Another world, Alfgard. In that world there was a man, having mastered great magic, he became the Lord of Demons. Because of him, many warriors died on the battlefield. Now he wins every battle, he defeated almost everyone on this earth. Sitting on the corpse of a monster, he asked, was this an alliance of all races? This is too boring. A bright flash appeared in the sky, which he noticed and immediately looked up, after which he smiled widely. Many angels descended from the sky to him, shining in the sacred light. He asked, did the gods decide to interfere in the affairs of mortals? Among them he saw an angel with 3 pairs of wings. It was the seraph Michael. He looked at him with a menacing look and said that they cannot allow him to do whatever he wants. The Lord of Demons rose from the corpse and red sparks swirled around him, and Michael in response also used magic. At his command, all the angels rushed to attack, and the Lord, raising his hand, lit a bright spark above his palm, after which his eye also sparkled. With a slight forward movement, he released a beam of light at the angels and they immediately stopped, after which the beam became more powerful and a bright flash of light blew them out of the way. The demon lord continued to attack, but did not notice how a seraph appeared behind him, who dispersed the clouds with his power. Finally noticing this, he turned around sharply, but it was too late. Michael created a huge bright sphere above himself, after which he smiled and sent an energy ball at his enemy. Upon collision with the ground, a powerful explosion occurred and the angels rushed to attack again. The battle between the seraph and the demon lord lasted 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, the battle was over. The wounded demon lord rose to his feet and caught his breath heavily, looking at the bloody corpse of his enemy. He smiled and said that he was a little tired. Hearing something behind him, he turned around with a smile and asked, is it her? The general of the demon army, Ishtar? The girl, behind whom there was a bunch of demons, confirmed his words with a smile and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Noticing the corpse of the seraph, she flew closer to him, after which she kicked him with all her might. His corpse crumbled into shining dust, and she stepped aside, and the demon lord, sighing heavily, asked why she appeared now. She answered that if they play fair, then no one can defeat him. She happily spread her arms to the sides, and said that he was exhausted from the battle with the heavens. She thinks they have a good chance now. He was silent, thinking about her words, and then clouds thickened in the sky. He burst out laughing loudly and shouted along with the roar of thunder that this was a good answer. Ishtar said that he still doesn't change. By the way, how is he feeling? Although it doesn't matter, he will die anyway. Just like in the legends about reincarnation, but today they will all disappear. The Lord answered with a wide smile that he feels very well. Ishtar, who did not expect such an answer, made a puzzled face and then asked, does he really understand what situation he is in? Her face became worried and nervous, and he, noticing this, was slightly surprised and thought, is it really her? But she immediately interrupted his thoughts and stepped aside with an upset look, saying that she understood everything. She turned to her army and told them to get rid of him until he recovered. Snapping her fingers, she gave the order to attack and they immediately ran to attack. The Lord smiled widely and spread his arms to the side, telling them to attack. But before he could do anything, one of the monsters cut off his left arm and it flew to the side. But he did not give up, he still had a second hand, with which he hit the monster that attacked him in the eye, after which blood splashed on the battlefield. As a result, he was defeated and lost one arm and a leg. The monsters gathered around him, threw many swords at him, turning his body into a sieve, and then the loud laughter of Ishtar was heard, who enjoyed his defeat. Then the Lord thought, did she really think that he could not be reborn? Disintegrating into many fragments after death, he found himself among the worlds and crossed the sea of stars, receiving a new life. Opening his eyes, he smiled widely and triumphantly clenched his hand into a fist. He was reborn in another world in Tokyo in the year 2000. On that day, dungeons appeared all over the world. Time passed. At night, a huge portal opened over the city, and already at dawn, the Cyclops stood on the rubble of it. The military opened fire on him, but the monster only stood in place and smiled. One of the soldiers said that this could not be. The tank crew also entered the battle and fired at the Cyclops, after which a huge cloud of dust rose and everything became quiet. After waiting a few seconds, someone asked if they succeeded. The civilians and soldiers were happy, but after a few seconds their faces distorted with horror. The dust settled and they all saw that there was not a single scratch on the monster. The people panicked and started running and screaming loudly. A little girl fell behind the others and tripped over a stone, falling face down. Noticing her, The Cyclops approached her and covered her with his shadow, after which he raised his weapon over her with a smile and swung it, but suddenly a loud clang of steel was heard. The man, who arrived in time to help, protected the girl and blocked the monster's attack. Taking her in his arms, he quickly jumped to the side, then turned around and swung his sword, cutting the monster's body in half. He carefully placed the child on the ground and, looking at the rising sun, adjusted his hair and looked down at the girl with a smile. She burst into tears and thanked her, and the civilians along with the military came out of their shelters and joyfully exclaimed that he was an S-rank hunter. The human armed forces are able to restrain ordinary monsters that come out of the dungeon, but they cannot cope with high-ranking ones. Along with dungeons and demons, people with special abilities appeared. Such people were called awakened. Many countries developed a special reward system for clearing dungeons. People created guilds, formed groups, and went into dungeons. Money, strength, power, all this belonged to hunters. Since high-ranking hunters were quite outstanding individuals, the media began to meddle in their personal lives. A boy named Hiroto was sitting in his room watching the news about an S-rank hunter supposedly having a mistress, and the talk turned to the era of hunters. Sitting in front of the TV, he thoughtfully repeated this and thought that of course this applies to talented people. Hunters can be hereditary. If a child has both parents who are hunters, then his abilities should awaken at the age of 12. His maximum strength and development speed depend on his rank. For example, an A-rank hunter can reach level 99, and an F-rank only 25. Talent is an insurmountable wall for anyone. While Hiroto was watching the news, he suddenly heard loud footsteps outside the door, and his face darkened with horror. The door opened and the guy called out his name, after which he ran into the house and hit the boy in the face with all his might, causing him to drop his phone from his hands. There are two types of people in the world: those who have talent and those who don't. After the man, another guy entered the house and they both started beating up the main character, and he cowered on the floor and covered his head with his hands, asking them to stop. They laughed loudly and asked what he was saying there. In other words, there are those who use others and those who are used. The guys continued to beat him and shout that he was just a useless parasite, but he could be useful. If a person is F-rank, then he will be no different from an ordinary one. No one will want to spend money on raising such people. Realizing this, the main character cried and thought that he was simply useless. The noise in this house was heard until late at night, and the phone that fell on the floor suddenly turned on. An unknown force penetrated the screen and the loading screen of the Demon Lord application appeared. As a child, Hiroto protected his friend from kids who bullied them, ready to get hit himself. The purpose of their shelter is to send promising children to the Academy for Hunters. When his friend Yuzuki took the test at age 12, she received an S rank, but was very confused. From a weak girl, she turned into a terrible lioness and stood up for her friend. As a result, the one who had always been afraid to fight back began to protect them herself. While he was hiding behind her back, he cried and thought that he was just pathetic. He would always remember how useless he was. Yuzuki, who had become a genius, was about to leave for the Hunter Academy. On the day of departure, she came to their usual place and told her friend that she could no longer protect him. Hiroto looked down and began to mumble, but suddenly she grabbed his shoulders and loudly called his name. Her face became serious, and she said that even weak people can fight back if they use their heads. After that, her escort called her, saying that they had to go, and she left, leaving her friend alone. He didn't even look at her and thought that he was really weak. She must have said that to him out of pity, although he thinks it was more likely out of kindness. He got hit right in the heart. Time passed, he went to the training dungeon for beginners along with the other children from the orphanage. Before entering the Hunter Academy, everyone must go through this dungeon. After passing through the portal, they found themselves in a dark cave, and one of the leaders of the group called out to the brats with displeasure and said that they would split the reward 9-1 in their favor. The team included a healer and an E-rank support, as well as 2 leaders warriors with a sword and an axe of C and D rank. A swordsman named Ruji said that they would not tolerate any objections from them. Hiroto looked away and thought that even here nothing had changed. Suddenly, a loud voice of a boy named Akira Tachibana was heard, telling them to wait. He walked around the rest of the boys and approached the leaders, saying that all the rewards are divided according to ability. He does not agree to give them almost the entire reward. This boy is an E-rank thief. An axe warrior named Takeshi approached him menacingly, but he didn't move and looked at him confidently, although he was starting to get nervous. After that, the guy hit him in the chest and started beating him up, saying that they were higher-ranked hunters, so he should just shut up and not argue with them anymore. MC took a step forward and worriedly told them to stop, but suddenly stopped and became silent, remembering his friend's words about how even weak people can fight back if they use their heads. He looked down and clenched his hand into a fist, realizing that he was truly pathetic. Ryuji wrapped his arms around his friend and told him to stop, and he asked him in a displeased voice what he said. He replied that if he beat him up anymore, they would be left without a thief. He could finish him off after they completed the dungeon. Takeshi elbowed him and walked away from Akira, saying that he was an idiot. He will deal with him after the dungeon. After this incident, they went further along the cave, but Akira had a hard time doing so because of the recent beatings. In one of the dark passages, yellow glowing eyes of goblins appeared, after which they jumped out of their hiding place and shouted loudly, announcing an attack. The guys immediately gathered together, and the leaders of the group took out their weapons, after which they began to attack in response. The warrior with an axe chopped the goblin's body and called out to the support, telling him not to stand still. The mage began to bring spells, from which his staff caught fire, after which the warrior continued to kill goblins together with his comrade and break forward along the passage. The main character, along with Akira, meanwhile hid behind a stone and said that they, hunters without combat skills, had better not rush into trouble. Looking at how they fought, he thought that they were pretty good. Talent is not only the highest possible level, but also the speed of skill development. The swordsman easily cut off the head of the last goblin, after which they all caught their breath, looking at the mountain of corpses. They immediately began to scold the support, asking if he can support them normally. They are already late. Let him pray that the reward does not decrease. Hiroto came out of hiding with Akira and said that he was very surprised when he objected to these two. He was sorry that he could not help him. He replied that there was nothing he could do. Even though this is a dungeon for beginners, they are risking their lives, so it is unfair if only they take all the reward. His gaze became sad and he said that he just really needed money. Hiroto repeated confusedly, "Money?" He confirmed this and said that he wanted to create his own hunter's guild. Nowadays guilds do not look at skills, they are only interested in money. Potions from the dungeons, does he know how many lives can be saved with it? Potions dropped by dungeon monsters have tremendous healing power. They can easily cure even the most incurable diseases. Hiroto replied that he heard that potions are now being sold for fabulous prices. Akira said that with this potion he could have saved his sister, but they had no money, so no one gave them the potion. Ordinary people will never get it, he thinks it's unfair. Hiroto became interested in this boy and replied that he understood. What is his name? He said his name with a smile and asked, and his? After introducing himself, they both shook hands and Akira said that it was nice to meet him. Suddenly, Ryuji called out to him and told him to come here. He pointed to the end of the corridor and said that there was a chest in the cave. Adjusting his gloves, Akira said with a confident look that it was his turn now. He walked up to the chest and they told him to hurry up and he said there was no need to hurry. It would be bad if he activated the trap. He put the flashlight in his mouth and started picking the lock and the warriors stepped aside and one of them said he just needed to know how to do his job. They settled down by the wall to rest and the support asked if there were any dangerous traps in the beginner dungeon. The healer took out a thermos and poured water into cups and handed them out to everyone. Hiroto awkwardly thanked her and thought it was no surprise that this dungeon was used because it was very low risk for beginners. Suddenly a loud, shrill scream was heard throughout the cave, coming from the chest. They immediately turned around and saw 3 weapons pierce the thief's body and blood spurting out of his wounds. Wheezing in pain, he let out his last breath and fell, after which the ground under their feet cracked and a collapse began. The cracks widened, and then the guys fell to the lower level of the cave with a loud scream. After everything went quiet, Hiroto cleared his throat and asked, was it a trap? He remembered the other guys and abruptly stood up, but suddenly froze in place, seeing Akira's corpse in front of him. This was the first time he saw a dead person. In the dungeons, people can die very easily. For the first time he realized such a simple thing, this could also happen to such a weak hunter like him. As soon as he realized this, he was overcome by horror. The other guys recovered from the fall and the healer came closer to Hiroto, and seeing the thief's corpse in front of him, she was horrified and quietly said that he was dead. She and the magician screamed loudly in fear and they both began to run around the cave. Takeshi gritted his teeth in displeasure, then hit the boy on the head and he lost his balance. Seeing this, the healer was very scared and the warriors irritably told them both to shut up, let them stop yelling. The swordsman said that because of his stupidity, one newbie died. He smiled slightly and told them to think positively. What business is it of theirs? Hearing this, the boys looked at him in surprise, and Takeshi agreed with the words of his comrade, saying that except for losing the ability to open the chest, there was no other problem. He clapped his hands and told them to get up. This would not bother them in any way. The cave was silent for a few seconds, and the healer glanced sideways at Hiroto. Noticing this, he shuddered, then looked up and noticed the chest. One of the warriors said that all the scary things were over. Now it was no longer shaking, so they just needed to go up. Let them boost his jump with magic and he'll pull them up. He called out to Hiroto and asked, he didn't forget the rope, right? Let him get it, they'll go back up once they get up. He got the rope and, looking at Akira one last time, replied that he understood. After going up, they went to the exit, and the mage, who was walking ahead and lighting their way, tearfully asked why there were deadly traps in the beginner dungeon. The healer suggested that maybe it was a dungeon paradox. The warriors asked, is it when the difficulty of the dungeon changes? She replied that it happens once every few years, in random dungeons. Ryuji replied with a smirk that he understood. But it was just an accident. Hearing this, Hiroto shuddered, and they continued, smiling, saying that in any case, they didn't care that he died. He was still trash with no skills. MC gritted his teeth and thought, how dare they? How can they disregard a person's life? However, it was already obvious that there was a paradox. The healer who was walking next to him took one step, but suddenly froze in place. Hiroto asked what happened. She suddenly turned her head towards him and became nervous, and then looked down and replied that it was as if she had stepped on something. After that, the ground shook again and a noise was heard. Bright sparks appeared in the air, which formed the shape of monsters. The boys froze in place, looking in shock as an entire pack of wolves appeared in front of them. The warrior exclaimed, are these northern wolves? They didn't even study at the Hunter Academy. How will they deal with them? The D-rank silver wolves bared their teeth, still hesitant to attack, and Ryuji exclaimed that there should be some in this dungeon. They only appear in the far part, which is now closed. The support said that it was a trap that summons monsters. But why is it in a dungeon for beginners? The warriors began to talk among themselves. One of them asked what to do. Even if they try to escape, they will be caught. His comrade agreed with him, and they began to think about what to do next. The wolves began to approach closer, growling menacingly. The dungeon paradox, also known as the chain paradox. As the name suggests, it is a chain of inexplicable events that change the dungeons. The swordsman asked what they would do. Takeshi remained silent, then suddenly remembered something and turned around, looking at the others. A wide smile appeared on his face, and he said that silver wolves have one peculiarity. Realizing what they were talking about, the guys looked at Hiroto, and he froze in horror. To prevent unforeseen situations, they studied the monsters that can appear in the dungeons. These wolves have one peculiarity. First, they attack the weakest member of the squad. The warriors grinned and said that they needed to run from here. They turned to Hiroto and told him to try his best. Takeshi pointed to the far passage in the cave and told him to run that way. The protagonist's voice trembled and he asked nervously, he must be joking, right? The warrior did not answer. He touched the shoulder of the frightened magician and said that he would become their bait. If he saw that he ran towards them, then let him attack him with magic. The boy was horrified, and Hiroto asked hopefully, he would not do that, right? The magician remained silent, thinking about it, and with tears in his eyes apologized to him. They passed by him and headed for the exit, and Hiroto looked after them and asked confusedly, what was wrong with them? They are joking, right? This is just a joke? The healer shuddered, frozen in place, and stutteredly apologized to him, saying that she did not want to die. Hearing this, the protagonist became very nervous and asked them to wait. He is sure that if they work together, they can handle them. They are comrades. The mage began to use his magic and apologized to him, and the healer trembled with fear and cried, also begging him for forgiveness. Hiroto froze and thought, why are they apologizing? After that, the guys ran past him and he turned around, thinking, so they are trying to say that it is not his fault? They all ran together to the right passage and he, stretching out his hand to them, thought that this world is very cruel, there is no place for the weak in it. Throwing down his backpack, he ran and, remembering his friend, thought that even she said that he was weak. Putting all his strength into running, he cried, but the wolves were faster. One of them jumped on him and knocked him to the ground, after which the rest began to tear his flesh, and he screamed loudly. His blood splashed everywhere, the wolves were merciless. His eyes rolled back from unbearable pain, and through loud screams he asked them to stop, but they did not care. Dragging his body parts around the cave, they continued to gnaw at him despite his pleas. He then wondered, is this where he will die? Remembering his childhood, he thought, is he weak? He doesn't want to be protected. He wants to protect others. He closed his teary eyes and quietly said that he still hasn't gotten stronger. He really wants to get stronger. While the wolves were gnawing on his bones, the phone that fell out of his pocket turned on, and the screen lit up. Noticing the glow, the wolves stopped eating and turned to the phone, freezing in place. Feeling something, they pressed their ears back, and then spat out the severed limbs from their mouths and ran away in fear. Hiroto's hand fell next to his corpse, and the phone screen continued to glow brightly until a loading screen appeared, which said that the Demon Lord's app was running, and began analyzing Hiroto Ijima's status. His status window appeared on the screen, and the system reported that a strong thirst for strength was detected. Access to the soul was obtained. The screen began to emit a bright rainbow glow from itself, which passed to the tortured corpse of the protagonist. The Soul Link skill was activated and his HP number lit up red, and then instantly restored to the maximum. The system reported that there were 180 seconds left before the reactivation of the Soul Link skill. After a while, he woke up, all the wounds on his body were restored, and his limbs grew. Letting out a sigh, he opened his eyes wide, and then abruptly rose and began to grab his throat, choking. Remembering what happened before this moment, he examined his body and wondered, is he alive? However, why did his wounds heal? He turned his gaze to the phone lying nearby and picked it up, thinking, is this all he has left? He looked at the screen in surprise and asked, the Demon Lord application? He does not remember installing what it is. He got to his feet, and seeing the pool of blood he was lying in, he remembered how the wolves tormented him and the severe pain. Realizing that it was his blood, he suddenly felt sick and vomited. Having caught his breath, he thought that it was definitely not a dream. Having wiped away his drool and looked around, he thought that he didn't really understand what happened, but now he was alone. It meant that the fact that he was abandoned was not a joke. He found his boot and put it on, thinking that in any case, he needed to get out of here now. Heading towards the passage that the rest of the guys ran into, he found himself in a spacious hall of the cave. Having gone further, he found himself in a corridor where goblin corpses lay on the ground. He immediately jumped out of his hiding place and frowned, thinking that it seemed that the guys went this way. He went further, feeling his body along the way, but did not notice the living goblin hiding in the shadows. The little monster rushed to attack with a loud scream, and MC turned towards him, seeing that one of his arms was cut off. He didn't have time to react in any way, and the goblin immediately sank its teeth into his neck, and he asked it to stop and screamed loudly. As a result, the monster knocked him to the ground and began to gnaw him, and Hiroto kept asking it to stop and hit his body with his fist several times. The goblin grabbed his neck with his hand and he began to choke. Trying to push him away, he grabbed his hand and pressed on his head, but the goblin continued to choke him, while smiling. After that, he let go of his neck and laughing loudly began to hit his head with his fist, and he began to cover his head with his hand. Goblins are the weakest kind of demons, especially goblins who have lost their arm. The monster punched Hiroto in the face with all his might, and he screamed in pain. He was weaker than even a goblin without an arm. At one point he weakened his defense, and got scared when he saw his hand in front of his face. The goblin stuck his fingers into his eye socket and pressed his eye, which made MC scream loudly. But the monster didn't stop, he continued to hit him in the eye with a wide smile on his face, and the app on his phone showed that there were 10 seconds left before the soul connection would be reactivated. Soon the time ran out and the skill was activated. The soul connection works for 24 hours, thanks to it a spiritual connection with the Demon Lord is established. At the end of the skill, an unlimited bonus is given. When the skill was activated, the monster wanted to hit him in the face again, but a glow began to emanate from his eye, which removed all the blood. As a result, his eye was restored and the goblin, clearly not expecting this, froze in confusion, but a second later he swung his hand again with a loud scream. But this time Hiroto was faster and responded in kind, piercing his eye with 2 fingers. Twisting his hand, it caused him even more pain and he grabbed his hand with a loud scream. When Hiroto pulled his fingers out of his eye socket, the goblin jumped back and grabbed his face. The protagonist meanwhile picked up a stone from the ground and got to his feet, telling the monster to get ready. The goblin fell to the ground and looked at him in horror, after which Hiroto quickly walked up to him and hit him on the head with a stone with all his might, continuing to hit him again and again. Soon the system reported that he killed a goblin that was not in Alfgard. He received a new skill called Insatiable Lord. The goblin was absorbed using the Demon Lord app. He is given 1 unit to strength, and since the gluttony requirements were met, he received a special bonus. All his stats will be increased. A status window opened, but he did not pay attention to it and continued to beat the goblin's corpse. His status window updated and now his health has increased to 242 units, and mana to 12. All his stats have increased to 6, except for strength. Due to bonuses it has increased to 7. Seeing the system window that appeared in front of him, he stopped and looked up, confusedly asking, "What is this?" Meanwhile the rest of the guys ran to the exit. A glow appeared from the swordsman's pocket. The Demon Lord application was launched on his phone. The status analysis began. Ruji Samejima has 127 HP and 4 MP. The highest stats are strength, agility, and endurance. Hiroto meanwhile waved his hand, trying to remove the system window, and asked, "What is this? What kind of status is this anyway? It looks more like a status from a game." Suddenly he seemed to be struck by electricity, and he felt something. Are they really waiting for him right around the corner? How does he know this if he can't even see anything? He closed his eyes and concentrated, seeing the silhouette of a monster around the corner, as if all of his body's senses had been heightened. Due to the increased stats, he could now sense someone else's presence around him. Opening his eyes, he frowned and thought that he had heard that the thief class had a danger detection skill. Could he really have gotten such a skill? He stood up and flexed his wrist, thinking that it was great. He then threw a rock into the passage and the monster heard it hit the ground and turned around abruptly, looking at it in confusion. Right after that, MC jumped out of the passage, clutching a rock in his hands. He jumped on the monster and hit it in the eye. The orc groaned in pain and grabbed his head with both hands, stepping back, and Hiroto took advantage of them and fell on top of him, hitting his head again. Gritting his teeth, he thought that he managed to catch him off guard, but he didn't think he could defeat him that easily. Goblins and orcs are different in ranks. Goblins are F-rank monsters, orcs are E-rank, and silver wolves are D-rank. So, in order to defeat him, the element of surprise is important. Even with a rock in his hand, he won't be able to inflict serious wounds. Tears appeared in his eyes and he continued to strike, thinking that in this case, he just needs to hit the same place. Soon, the monster's screams died down and his hand fell to the ground. Hiroto caught his breath and said that he did it. The system reported an achievement. He killed an orc who was not in Alfgard. A system window appeared in front of him, which reported that the Lord's insatiability was activated. The orc was absorbed using the Demon Lord's application. For this he received a special bonus. All his stats increased. For the kill, he received experience points. His level rose to 3. The status window showed that his health increased to 262 units, mana to 14. His strength increased to 9, and the rest of the stats to 7. He looked at the system window in confusion and exclaimed in his thoughts, "What is this anyway?" After that, he began to understand this system. Looking at his stats, he thought that his best stat was his strength. He looked down at the bloody stone he was holding in his hand and decided to check if the stats were right. Concentrating, he squeezed the stone, after which it broke and the pieces flew apart. He looked at his hand in surprise and then fell to the ground, realizing what just happened. He unclenched his hand and looking at the falling dust, he thought that the stone had shattered. This is the strength of a novice hunter in the academy. But where did he get this? He looked up at the status window and asked, "Is this really true?" Noticing a flock of bats on the ceiling, he threw a stone at them and headed forward down the corridor. While he killed the bats with accurate throws and dispersed the rest, he was able to understand something about this system. If he kills a certain type of demon for the first time, the Lord's insatiability skill will activate. From orcs and goblins he received an additional bonus to strength, and from bats his agility increased. With one blow stopping the orc that was behind him, he knocked him to the ground, and then kicked him with all his might. While he was killing monsters in this dungeon, he found out that for killing an orc and a goblin he gets a bonus in strength equal to 1 unit, as well as a bonus to agility from a bat. Skeletons give a bonus to magic power. From stone goblins he received a bonus to endurance. A status window appeared in front of him, which reported that his level increased to 4th, health to 282, mana to 18. His strength increased to 10, and the rest of the characteristics, except for spirit, to 9. He, of course, heard that when hunting alone the level increases very quickly. but he was able to raise 2 levels already. Realizing this, he was surprised and went further into the cave, thinking that it seemed like the soul link skill lasted for 24 hours. Throwing a stone in his hand and catching it, he threw it towards the monster and cut off its head, thinking that, in other words, now he can do whatever he wants. He thinks he shouldn't waste time looking for an exit and returning to the shelter. He'd better go deeper into the dungeon. Finding himself in a cave where there were many crystals, he noticed a barrier that blocked the passage further. He touched it and wondered if he could go further into the dungeon without permission. He lowered his head and sighed, thinking that in that case, he should deal with the silver wolves. After that, a system window appeared in front of him, informing him that he had received a new quest when passing the beginner dungeon. The quest will start in 10 seconds. He read what was written and asked in surprise, a quest? So what this time? The system window disappeared after a while, and then a sound was heard behind him. He turned around and saw a silver wolf coming out of the darkness, and a whole pack was behind it. They growled menacingly and headed towards him, which made him shudder and think, isn't this an underwater floor of the dungeon? The agility value in his system window lit up, showing that it was activated, and MC backed away and thought that this was a bad idea. The wolves slowly approached him, starting to surround him, and he froze in fear. Something told him that right now he was looking into the face of his death. One of the wolves growled loudly and Hiroto was scared, but quickly pulled himself together and managed to move to the side a moment before the bite, dodging. He dodged and happily thought that he succeeded. It seems that he really got stronger. Because of high agility, he can now see the movements of the silver wolves. He ran further and another wolf stood in his way, which he immediately hit with his knee and gritted his teeth, mentally saying that he got it. He jumped over the beast and ended up behind it, after which it turned around and a blue aura appeared around it. Seeing this, the protagonist became upset and thought, that is, he can't handle it with his bare hands? The bodies of the other wolves were covered with exactly the same aura, and they surrounded him from all sides so that he could not escape. Not knowing what to do, he stayed in place and watched as they approached, wondering what this was. One of the wolves pounced on him and he hit it with his fist, but then it fell on him with all its weight and knocked him to the ground. Hiroto realized that in the end, nothing had changed since the last time. After that, the rest of the wolves pounced on him and began to bite into his body, from which his blood splattered the barrier. Soon they tore his body into pieces and began to devour him, but the soul link skill activated. While the wolves were devouring his body parts, his health began to recover, and soon the HP bar was completely full. The hand that the wolf was devouring began to fall apart along with the rest of his body. The animals watched as the boy's corpse rose to the top and his wounds miraculously healed, and his limbs were restored. Thus, the protagonist experienced a second death. His body was completely restored and he opened his eyes, and then suddenly felt himself falling down and became scared. He hit the ground and looked up in confusion, and the wolves sniffed, after which they immediately attacked him and tore his body apart again. The system reported that since the minimum requirements were met, he received a new skill, pain resistance. This skill was immediately activated, and as soon as he died again, the soul link skill also became active. His corpse rose into the air again, interrupting the wolves' meal, and they looked up, watching as his body was completely restored again. Resurrected, his eyes widened and he fell to the ground again, after which the wolves pounced on him again. An immortal body is a curse, not a gift. This has happened in many movies. The wolves tore his body apart again and ate him. Death during hellish torture is salvation, but an immortal body will never receive this. Therefore, immortality is a real curse. His body was torn apart, and right now he is living this curse, dying in hellish pain and coming back to life again. Thus, his pain resistance increased to level 3, and he also gained a new skill called fearlessness. Because his new skill blocks part of his pain, he no longer feels like he is being eaten alive. He was revived again, and, landing on the ground, the first thing he did was punch the wolf. He couldn't handle it with his bare hands, he needed at least some kind of weapon. He remembered that Akira's corpse was lying among the rubble, with a weapon sticking out of it, and he froze in place, horrified. He decided that he had to go back. He soon ran to the crash site, and noticed a corpse among the rubble. Running closer, he noticed his lifeless eyes staring into space, as well as a long sword sticking out of his chest. Grabbing the weapon by the hilt, he pulled it out of Akira's body, causing it to rise, and then pulled the blade out of his stomach. At that very moment, an enraged wolf appeared behind him, whose neck he immediately cut with the blade. Feeling its warm blood on his face, he smiled and thought that he was able to kill him. He turned around and, looking at the rest of the wolves, said that now it was time to begin their crazy fight. With a smile on his face, he pointed a dagger at them and remembered how he once watched a hunter's interview on TV. He was asked about gaining experience, and he answered that they could hunt alone, without a team. They can also choose stronger demons. The girl asked, "Is this true? If a student from the Hunter Academy starts hunting 100 silver wolves, what exactly will happen?" He thought for a second and replied that if he succeeds, then it will be a great achievement. Hiroto was able to do it. The entire cave was decorated with wolf corpses. Wiping the sweat from his face, he screamed loudly, splashing out all his emotions, and his voice echoed throughout the cave. He was able to deal with a huge pack of wolves only with the help of the Soul Link and Pain Resistance skills, which were activated every time. As a result, Pain Resistance increased to level 5, and Fearlessness to level 2. He received an achievement for killing a silver wolf, after which the Lord's Insatiability skill was activated, and he received a bonus to strength, as well as an increase in all characteristics. He received the title of Great Hunter due to killing a large number of demons. All the numbers in the status window changed, and Hiroto froze in surprise when he noticed that he had received a title and increased his fearlessness level. Great Hunter is a special S-rank title awarded to those who are able to defeat demons with an overwhelming difference in strength. All damage dealt is increased by 20%. The fearlessness skill increases the health bonus by 5% for each level. This is not displayed in the status window, but is taken into account when calculating skill damage. MC thought that if what was written here was true, this was more like a short-term bonus. How was it even possible to get level 10 in just a day? He tiredly buried his hand in his hair and thought that he still didn't fully understand how these abilities worked, so he shouldn't rely on them too much. He looked up at the status window, seeing a notification icon next to the levels. He thought, "What is this?" He clicked on the icon and a new system window appeared in front of him, informing him that he had received a limited time quest. Challenge the Great Labyrinth. He successfully cleared the dungeons. Would he like to challenge the Great Labyrinth where various monsters roam? There are monsters of the same species in the labyrinth, but the Lord's Insatiability skill will treat them as if they had not been killed before. When he saw the inscription that he had completed the dungeon, he said in surprise that he had not yet been to the forbidden area. By the way, that area is connected to other dungeons. He looked at the corpses and thought that of course they were getting stronger. Thanks to the Lord's Insatiability skill, he felt his strength filling up. He clenched his hand into a fist, checking it out, and then looked up at the system window again and wondered whether he should accept this quest or not. He crossed his arms over his chest and frowned, thinking about it. The Great Labyrinth, various demons, having immortality and coping with death in battle. He finally understood the difference between these. And he doesn't want to go through that feeling again. With these thoughts, he headed for the exit, but suddenly he was stopped by Yuzuki's voice, which appeared in his head, calling his name. He suddenly froze in place and remembered how she smiled through her tears when he protected her, and then decided to check how much time he had left until the soul connection ended. Calling up the status window and pressing something, he called up a new system window in front of him and found out that there were 18 hours and 32 minutes left until the soul connection ended. After that, he clenched his hand into a fist and, hitting himself in the face with all his might, shouted that he was such an idiot. Why did he have such a terrible life? He continued to beat himself until he bled and exclaimed that everyone treated him like trash. Is this all because of a lack of talent? He remembered Yuzuki and shouted, "And is this all fair?" He hit himself on the chest and shouted through tears that this was a lie. The skill activated and blue sparks appeared on his body that healed his wounds. Calming down, he wiped his tears and looked at his fist, saying that his wounds had healed. He tilted his head back, took a deep breath, then asked with a confident look, "Even with such strength, how can he have a future if he is afraid to take a step?" He looked at the system window resolutely and exclaimed that he wanted to challenge the Great Labyrinth. The system reported that the temporary task was accepted. The teleportation began. His body began to crumble into small fragments, and he disappeared from the dungeon. Meanwhile, in the shelter, in one of the rooms, the guys were resting and drinking alcohol. Ryuji took a glass from the table and, bringing it to his face, said that in any case, accidents in dungeons are very common. He fell silent, and one of the guys agreed with him, and his friend's lips trembled, and he said that, however, dying in a beginner's dungeon is still something you have to try. After that, they all laughed very loudly and began to discuss Hiroto's death. One of them asked, "How weak do you have to be?" Another boy said that even a child could handle it. Their friend came to the table to pour alcohol and said that there was almost no danger there, even beginners could handle it. Takashi wiped away the tears that came from laughter and told them to put the jokes aside. He made a sad face and said that to tell the truth, he really felt sorry for those guys. The boy asked, "Is that true?" He handed him a glass and said that even if he was an experienced hunter, anyone would be shocked at the sight of a dead person. He snatched the glass from his hand and told him not to talk nonsense. By the way, next week, an inspection team from the Hunter Academy is supposed to come to them for training fights. The boy slammed his fist into his palm and, remembering Hiroto, asked what about that scum. He replied that he was their comrade. He felt sorry for that kid. He smiled and added that they could use him somewhere else. After that, they laughed again and continued to chat cheerfully, and on the phone that was lying on the table, the loading crane of the Demon Lord application appeared and the system reported that the analysis of Murabayashi Takashi's status began. He is level 5, 137 health and 5 mana, strength and agility are 1, spirit 3, and endurance and magic power 6. Meanwhile, MC was in the labyrinth and had just been revived. He had already lost count of how many times he had been killed. As soon as he got to his feet, the wolf pounced on him and sank its teeth into his shoulder, after which he suddenly turned around and swung his sword, cutting off his head. He wrinkled his face as his wound began to heal, and then looked at the system window, where there was a history of skill use. Soon he finally got there, to the last floor of the great labyrinth. There he was met by a huge praying mantis, and he was stuck in an endless cycle of deaths and revivals. But after so many attempts he finally defeated the boss. A system window popped up in front of him, and he looked at it with a heavy sigh. The system reported that he had passed all the floors of the great labyrinth. The reward for the player began to be given out. He received the skill Awakening of Mana. His level increased to 15, HP increased to 476, and MP to 156. His stats were almost the same, but the highest indicators were in strength and magic power. The system reported that the reverse teleportation began. He would be returned to the original world. Before he could look back, he was already superior to ordinary hunters in everything. Morning came, the two friends went to the toilet. Takashi asked, "He heard, right?" Ryuji replied that of course he heard those strange rumors about Hiroto. He would not have been able to get out of that dungeon alive. His friend agreed and they both laughed, but then he asked, "But what if he really escaped?" Ryuji replied that there was no way. Takashi looked at him with a sly look and he asked, "Does he remember their agreement about the fight?" He confirmed his words with a smile, and he said that without an agreement they would not have managed. A boy came out of the toilet stall and asked, "Do the two of them still not know?" They turned their gaze to him and asked, "What is it?" He replied that this time they introduced a new rule that each hunter can only participate in one fight. Hearing this, they were very surprised. Meanwhile, the protagonist was resting in his room, sitting on the floor by the bed. He does not remember anything at all about the day when he returned from the great labyrinth. He heard that he was found unconscious at the gates of the orphanage. It was all a dream. This is the only logical explanation for everything that is happening. He reached for the phone that was lying on the table and, launching the Demon Lord's application, opened the status window. Right now, he has only two options in his head: either he is imagining it, or all this is really happening. There was a loud knock on the door, and he came outside asking who was there. Ryuji appeared on his doorstep, greeting him with an unkind smile and asking if they could talk. After that they went into the storeroom and he, smiling and clapping his hands, said that it just so happened that he would be his opponent in a training fight. He extended his hand and asked him to take care of him. Hiroto hesitantly agreed and reached for his hand, but suddenly realized what he had done and thought that he had reflexively extended his hand to him. Ryuji said that of course, if he already had a fight pending, he would no longer be able to participate in other fights. But it just so happened that he had already arranged to fight with others. He shook his hand tightly and began to squeeze it, smirking as he said that it was better for him not to come. Did he understand everything? MC remained silent and looked at his hand in surprise, and Ryuji, not seeing the expected reaction, thought that he was pressing with all his might. Why didn't it hurt? Was he really enduring it? Hiroto, meanwhile, was trying to understand what was going on and thought that this was the pain-resistance skill in action, right? He pulled his hand back, thinking that until recently, just looking at him was enough to terrify him. But compared to the Silver Wolves, this man was nothing. He was an ordinary nonentity. Realizing this, he smirked and Ryuji angrily attacked him with his fists, exclaiming, "What's so funny? Seeing his fist, MC froze in place and a signal was sent to his brain, forcing all his senses to work much faster. Everything that was happening around him seemed to be in slow motion. Ryuji was approaching him so slowly that one could think that he was not moving at all. Noticing this, Hiroto wondered what he was doing. Everything was too slow. Should he answer him? Having made a decision, he immediately took action and, getting into a stable stance, clenched his hands into fists and punched one hand upwards, hitting his enemy in the face. Blood gushed out of Ryuji's nose and broken lip, and before he could even understand anything, he began to lose his balance and wonder what just happened. A second before he hit the floor, he saw Hiroto's gloomy face, whose eyes were staring at him intently, after which he fell and wiped the blood from his face. Meanwhile, the protagonist looked at his fist in surprise, and his enemy thought, what did he just do? Looking at how he made a face in pain, Hiroto wondered, is he that weak? He remembered his stats and thought, is it because of the difference in levels? After recovering from the blow, the guy jumped to his feet and grabbed him by the clothes, shouting that he was an idiot. His whole body shook with anger and he asked, how dare he? How dare a trash like him hit him? Has he completely lost his fear? He calmed down a little and asked with a smile, what kind of cowardly attack was that? If he apologized right now, then he could forgive him. Otherwise, he wouldn't get off that easy. After all, he was just low-ranking trash. Before that, Hiroto stood and endured as his drool from screaming flew into his face, but after these words, he couldn't stand it and clenched his hand into a fist, thinking that for his current self, he was just a nobody. But he immediately calmed down and unclenched his hand and thought that if he lost his temper, he would be no different from these guys. He closed his eyes and suggested that he not cause trouble. His enemy got angry and exclaimed, and he says such a thing after hitting him? MC grabbed his hand, which was holding him by his clothes, and then squeezed it, and with a determined look said that he would advise him to listen. Ryuji pulled his hand out of his grip, and he calmly walked to the exit. Noticing this, he displeasedly ordered him to stop, after which Hiroto turned to him and said that he did not want to bother him, so he advised him not to bother him either. Having looked at him with a confident and threatening look for the last time, he left, and Ryuji looked after him in confusion. The door slammed and he was left alone in the room with his feeling of defeat. In order to throw out negative emotions, he cursed loudly and kicked the box that was standing on the shelf. Soon Hiroto returned to his room and opened the first aid kit. From there, he took out a syringe, after which he injected himself into a vein and began to draw blood into a test tube. Once a week, he must donate blood for analysis and confirmation of his hunter status. After that, he went down to the hall where they were taking blood. The man told him to hurry up, he was the last one. Even F ranks are allowed to fight? Hiroto put a test tube in his container and apologized to him, then headed back to his room, but suddenly stopped and turned around thinking that they were checking the statuses of the hunters. So they would see his level and status? He got worried and hoped that he would not have problems. Meanwhile, Ryuji's company gathered in one room. The boy began to treat the wounds and he pushed him away, exclaiming how dare he hit him. He got very angry and said that he could not even touch him. The boy began to collect the scattered medicines and asked him to calm down. Ryuji immediately fell silent, but after a short pause asked why he was so strong. Maybe he found some rare item in the dungeon. The boy replied that this was a dungeon for beginners, there was nothing valuable there. Maybe he found something valuable after the dungeon. He couldn't see any other explanation for how he managed to get out of the dungeon alive. Takashi said that no matter what happened, they needed to deal with him. He was fighting, so they would deal with him there. Ryuji slammed his fist on the table and told him to wait. He wanted to take revenge on him himself? He responded by jumping up from his seat and grabbing him by the clothes, exclaiming that it was his mistake that was the reason they were sitting here now. Ryuji apologized and his friend let him go, saying that every hunter's equipment was checked before the fights. Even if he had a rare item, it wouldn't help him. He returned to his seat and quickly ran his thumb over his neck, telling him to think about it himself, he was just trash. They shouldn't even worry about it. Ryuji agreed, but he started to doubt, and his friend sat closer to him, smiling and telling him that once the fights were over they would have a good talk with him. Everyone else in the room smiled and he said that they would have a hearty fight then. Meanwhile in the support center, in the lab, a man was sitting at the computer and checking the blood he had taken while eating noodles, but suddenly something really surprised him and his food fell over. He suddenly jumped up from his chair and exclaimed, "What is this?" When he was checking Hiroto's information, he saw a bunch of errors on the monitor. His colleague, who was sitting opposite, asked what happened. He replied that there were some small problems. She got up from her seat and walked over to him, then looked at the monitor, and he said that Ijima had never been to the Hunter Academy, but he was already level 15. Seeing this, she was surprised, then leaned closer to the screen, looking at his photo. Her colleague pointed at the screen and asked if she saw an error next to his status. She asked if he had heard that people who encountered a dungeon paradox also receive an abnormal status. They made a report on the work done and threw it into the container, after which the man said that one such incident happened in the training dungeon of this orphanage. And how should they tell the authorities about this? Just recently, this guy was level 1 and suddenly became 15. Looks like the director will have to change his schedule. The girl asked if they need to report anything. Until he enters the academy, even if he has an abnormal status, it is none of their concern. Her colleague frowned slightly and looked at her, and she continued, saying that, as she already said, a lot of strange things happen because of the paradox. Anyone who trains at the academy will be able to become as strong as him. Besides, this kid has F-rank abilities. Let him not bother his head with this. He asked excitedly, but isn't this too weird? He was just level 1 a while ago. She turned around and asked with a smile, he said it was weird? Demons appeared out of nowhere, the world changed a lot. She pointed to the monitor and said that this was no exception either. Doesn't he think there are too many weird things happening right now? Her face became serious, and she added that hunters can be weird too. Time passed, and the day of the fights arrived. There were a lot of people gathered in the dining room, but they were all standing around one table and looking at something there with interest. Hiroto, whom they were watching, was eating non-stop, and the bowls on his table were quickly piling up. After finishing the last bowl of rice, he went to the cook and asked her for more, and she said that he was eating so much. Was he really there, Hiroto? He asked if she could bring the rest. She replied that she didn't mind, after which he returned to the table and a woman came up to him and said that he had a pretty good appetite. Does he mind if she sits down? Without waiting for an answer, she sat down opposite him and asked where his appetite was coming from. He remained silent and wondered if she really thought he was some kind of gluttony demon. He didn't answer her question and said hesitantly that he hadn't seen her here before. Who was she? She smirked and then replied that she was the head instructor of the Hunter Academy. Everyone else who heard this froze in place and looked at her in surprise, and she continued, saying that she came to see the new talents at today's fights. She visited the orphanage every year. She was surprised that he didn't remember such a beauty. She smiled and asked, does he remember his little sister? The protagonist remembered her and thought that it was she who spoke to Yuzuki right after the fight. The instructor shrugged and said that many schools were aiming to win, they'd better try hard. By the way, she was watching him too and noticed something. Hearing this, Hiroto frowned and looked at her suspiciously, then remembered the Demon Lord app and closed his eyes. The smile disappeared from her face and she said that she understood. Did he also get into that disaster in the dungeon? Did he feel anything strange or unusual? When people get into a paradox, they can develop unusual abilities. She had been a scout for many years and her intuition had always helped her. Maybe he still knows something? She doesn't want to brag, but her intuition has never let her down. He remained silent again and thought that she was an instructor at the Hunter Academy where Yuzuki was currently studying. Someday they will definitely find out about him. He replied that there was nothing interesting in his story. She was glad that he finally spoke, but the smile immediately slid off her face when he said that he was a very ordinary hunter with F-rank abilities. She was confused when she learned his rank, after which she wanted to ask something, but stopped and awkwardly scratched the back of her head, saying that she had gone too far. Her intuition must be wrong too. She apologized to him and said that she had been so unceremonious in forcing a conversation on him. He did not listen to her until the end and got up from his chair, saying that everything was fine, this was a common thing. She excitedly asked him to wait and put her hand in her pocket, saying that low-ranking hunters were almost no different from ordinary people, but that did not mean that they were alone. She handed him a business card and said that if something happened, he could contact her. She would help him in any way she could. Seeing her gesture, he thought that the strong in this world treat the weak differently. Some enslave the weak, while others are ready to come to the rescue. He looked down at the business card and a thought flashed through his mind that she looked a lot like Yuzuki. It was time for the fights, and spectators and participants had gathered in the training arena. Rumor has it that this place is used to test new military weapons. Everything was built from materials mined in the dungeons and built like a fighting arena. Armed with a wooden sword, Hiroto walked through the crowd of other guys and found himself in the waiting room where his enemies were sitting. Noticing him, they began to whisper, and the instructor meanwhile took a seat in the stands. Soon Hiroto and Takeshi entered the arena and stood opposite each other. Takeshi said that he would be honest. In this battle, he could not ask for mercy. He smiled and waved his weapon, saying that of course he would attack with all his might. Hiroto didn't react to his words and he mockingly looked at him and said that today he might even die. Takaki smugly said that accidental death is a common thing in hunter duels. Previously, Yuzuki would have saved him, but it's a pity that she is no longer around. He arrogantly said that if he dies, he will be the second dead person in their squad. Hiroto remembered how cute Akira was, and Takaki said angrily and with anticipation, he hoped they would have a good time. Hiroto got angry and frowned while looking at him, and listening to this, he said that it would be better for both of them to stop holding back. They were standing in the stadium, the whole crowd was shouting loudly, and the referee was standing between them. Hiroto angrily and intently looked at Takaki, and he mocked him. Today he has reasons to fight him seriously today. He said that if he showed good results to the inspectors, then he would have a bright future. He dropped the stick from his hands and it fell next to him, and Hiroto looked at him in confusion and thought, what is he doing? Takaki exhaled and said that Hiroto was only a weak F rank, what's the point of beating him with a sword? So he decided to use magic, and bright streams of fire immediately appeared around him. Although he is a warrior, he also owns magic. Although it was difficult for him to do this, he surrounded himself with fire magic. There were huge flames. He asked, a warrior who owns magic is a rare sight, isn't it? Hiroto looked at him, and then was horrified when he realized, so he deliberately hid his strength, and left him to die in that dungeon. He felt terribly offended, in which case he put his hand forward and said that he would use magic. He surrounded himself with a bright aura, and Takaki looked at him, and with a small ball, he began to shake and angrily screamed, is he laughing at him? He is an ordinary F-rank trash. With his powers, he wants to compete with him? Compared to him, A dark circle appeared under Hiroto's feet. Compared to what he saw in the great labyrinth, he is just an insect. He looked at it indifferently. He was surrounded by dark magic and lightning. His powers were getting stronger. Streams and lightning rose higher. There was a loud hum from them. A sparkling ball of magic and even more streams appeared in Hiroto's hand. The spectators in the stands were shocked. This can't be. How can an F rank use magic? Nonsense. Even with magical abilities, how could he use a spell of such power? They all continued to wonder, as did Takaki. But he came to the realization and became afraid of him. He turned around and screamed anxiously, where did such power come from? But then he decided to try and continued to cast with tension, saying that Hiroto would burn to ashes. He used a fireball. He stood in front of Hiroto with a huge pillar of dark magic and lightning with a small piece of magic. The system reported receiving the ability of the element of fire, a flash of hellfire. The protagonist said, a flash of hellfire, and all the mass of energy and magic surrounding him turned into a ball that flew towards Takaki. He stopped and screamed in fear, no! The protagonist moved his finger a little and it all flew past Takaki's face, who was slightly injured. He and the referee ducked, and a huge stream of magic hit the stands. There was a huge explosion, and then only lightning and smoke remained. Takaki was screaming in fear all this time. The audience didn't know how to react at first, but then they all started screaming and clapping. It was awesome. The academy workers immediately started fussing and calling their superiors. The teacher asked in surprise, 3rd level? No, this is definitely 4th level magic. She was confused. Last year it was Yuzuki, and now it's him? She was leaving the stands and said that this year she also found an amazing talent. Hiroto vaguely remembered what happened when he used the Hellfire Flash. He was lying tiredly on his bed and watching TV. That day he decided that he would go to the same academy as Yuzuki. A huge amount of money was transferred to his account, and one day his life changed dramatically. In his dream, he seemed to appear from bright, pure matter. His body was formed anew from something pure as the sky. He sparkled and illuminated everything with himself, but was in front of a dark creature. This is the Demon Lord, chained in chains, even too many. Among the dark magic, Hiroto approached and was the one who let the light to him. He looked at him in surprise and asked who he was. In response, a confident Demon Lord looked at him. Then Hiroto woke up and looked at the phone. He stood up in surprise and asked, what is this? The system reported that he had received the status of a Demon Lord. New features were opened in the Lord's application. In 36 hours, a special event will begin. The Hunt for the Demon Lord. He looked closely at the proposal, The Hunt for the Demon Lord, and then he was told that there were 35 hours and 59 minutes left until his death. He continued to look at the phone screen with this notification in surprise, but suddenly something strange appeared on the screen. He began to wave the phone in displeasure and asked, "What is this? What kind of interference? Why at this time?" "The system is waiting for Ijima Hiroto's decision. After confirmation, new features will be added to the application. After 36 hours, hunting bonuses will be issued. There are 35 hours, 59 minutes, 56 seconds left until receiving." He asked, "Is the text garbled?" Then MC put the phone on the chair next to him and tiredly fell onto the bed. He thought, at that moment, it seemed like something was written about the event and the Demon Lord. He then sat on the bed in front of the phone. However, thanks to this application, he was able to become stronger. He opened the curtains and looked out the window, all this for the sake of becoming stronger. Hiroto opened the curtains and with a surge of strength began to feel more confident. He stood in front of the phone. The system again warned that there were 35 hours, 59 minutes and 42 seconds left. If he wanted to avoid death, he must immediately get rid of the Demon Lord application. If no response is received within 24 hours, it will mean that he has consented to the death of the owner. Does he want to delete the Demon Lord application? He was given two selection buttons, yes and no. After that, strong interference appeared again, and then the system completely mixed into a spiral. Everything went dark and smoky, and the Demon Lord looked on with a satisfied and cunning expression. The system continued to act strangely, and then a new message began to appear through the static with new deadlines that changed. The numbers kept changing, they were illegible. He picked up the phone and looked at it and asked, "Is there interference again?" For the safety of the roads, the demons from the dungeons must be killed constantly. They cause incredible destruction. If this is not done, it can cause panic and the crowd to flee. Despite this, they still have a lot to learn about the dungeons. Sometimes huge flocks of monsters can appear. Right now they were following the car that Hiroto was in. They can destroy a city, just like this one. The protagonist thanked them for coming for him, so this is the city where the disaster occurred. The worker replied that this is true, it happened about 10 years ago, so it has become calmer now. The protagonist looked out the window. The worker said, however, the authorities refused to deal with this area. He looked at the surroundings filled with monsters and asked, "Are only the dead living there now?" The worker corrected him and said, more precisely, "They are the undead." The worker looked at him in the mirror. Hiroto said, "It seems like the hunters of the Artemis Academy have a lot of useful information. All these undead used to be people, right? Because of the demon invasion, this entire land was saturated with negative energy. That's why all these undead appeared. All these monsters were suffering and their pain filled the aura of this place." They drove straight at one of the undead and Hiroto tensed up and then heard a loud bang. The undead hit the car and the monster was thrown up, and when they drove further, the monster fell and hit the road. Hiroto turned around. He saw the ruins and said that there was a lot of destruction. The worker said that in these areas, various cleaning methods were used, chemical weapons were no exception. This country decided to sacrifice this city. He continued to drive. However, the dungeon remained intact. If the monsters inside the dungeon are not destroyed, there is a high probability that the disaster will happen again. They stopped near a huge remnant of a building, which had a crack and a bright portal. The worker hopes that they can prevent this. By the way, Hiroto can see. He adjusted the mirror and said that this is a dungeon. He lit a cigarette and said that he didn't think so. It's amazing, with such outstanding abilities, he would only be an F rank. He exhaled smoke. Even with abilities, a low level is still a problem. The maximum level for F ranks is 25, right? MC looked at him with displeasure, and then the worker said, even if a paradox happened in the dungeon, he still has a low rank. So he thinks he shouldn't have gone to the academy. Hiroto didn't say anything and grabbed the door handle, and when he got out and opened his door, the worker yelled in alarm, "What is he doing?" The protagonist tore his seatbelt, and the worker yelled in fear that he was an ordinary person and can't stand violence. Hiroto tried to pull him out of the car, and he kept yelling at him to wait. He's strong, of course, but there are many people who are as good as him. MC didn't answer and continued to pull him out with displeasure. He shouted that there was no need to make a scene about such a thing. Can he hear him? But when the protagonist pulled him out of the car and put him on his shoulder, he asked, "What?" The next moment, the giant monster kicked powerfully, and with a loud sound of impact, their car flew into pieces. Hiroto managed to jump back, and the guy screamed loudly, he asked in horror. What? In front of them stood a huge and scary Wendigo monster of difficulty B. It was shrouded in dust and a bright aura. The guy asked, shouldn't there be a notification about the appearance of such demons? While the monster was destroying everything, they quickly ran away and finally hid around the corner of the building, and then Hiroto looked at what was happening. The demon was shrouding everything in clouds of ice and snow, destroying all the buildings and cars. The worker said if it didn't notice them, then he thinks they should wait for the hunters there. He looked at the phone screen. It was 3 p.m. and 55 minutes. According to the rules, every hunter in the academy must return from the dungeon at 4 o'clock. In the group that is currently in the dungeon, there is a famous flame witch. Hiroto thought, the flame witch? Her beautiful image shrouded in magic immediately appeared in front of him. Could it be Yuzuki? He asked, is it a very dangerous demon with a difficulty of B, right? Does he think they can handle it? The worker replied that there are many gifted hunters studying at the academy. He does not know where this monster came from, but they only need to hold out for 5 minutes. The elite hunters will take care of the rest. The protagonist said that he had a question. Is his gun real? The worker became worried because his gun was hidden under his jacket, but he asked what use is a normal gun. Hiroto took out a dagger and said that if he does not want to use it, then he asks to give the gun to him. The surprised guy asked what Hiroto was talking about. Is he crazy? The protagonist held the dagger in front of him and pointed forward. In this situation, he had no choice. A giant suddenly appeared from the building opposite, destroying everything and filling the area with icy smoke. The guy sweated from fear and said, what? The protagonist frowned and said that they don't have 5 minutes now. The demon breathed icy steam on them. There was a huge crystal in his chest. Hiroto watched him, and the monster looked for them and looked around. Suddenly, he raised his head up and screamed loudly and furiously. Hiroto and the escort covered their ears. The monster broke the glass and looked out of the window. He was looking for them. The worker screamed, is he completely crazy? What does he want to do to such a monster with an ordinary weapon? This is a demon, a threat comparable to a catastrophe. Hiroto thought with displeasure, does that mean he's crazy? But then he grinned and asked, what if this is so? He asked again to give him the gun, but the worker told him to stop. Does he even know how to use it? He hid the gun and repeated again that a normal weapon would not work. That's right, monsters' bodies are protected by a special field. He remembered all the monsters he had met before. Hunters also have such a field. It's like a barrier, so only hunters can break through this field with their strength and magic. MC again began to ask for a gun very persistently. The worker continued to doubt, but then looked ahead in fear. The monster's ice magic was already approaching them. Hiroto irritably asked to give him the gun faster. Then he doubted, but still gave the gun, and Hiroto thanked him. The worker said that at least he should tell how he was going to use it. He replied that he would become bait, and the attendant asked what he said. The protagonist said that in the academy you can learn a lot about demons. What are his weak points? The worker said that he was just an ordinary employee. How would he know? The giant was already very close to them, and Hiroto said that at a certain point in their lives they are very sensitive to noise, such as gunshots. The guy listened to him in surprise. The protagonist had heard that such monsters were found throughout the city. For a Wendigo, a gun is no threat, but if it is something larger, it can work. The demon looked at them terribly. The monsters realized that people with such weapons are dangerous, so they adapted to fight them. The guy clenched his teeth in fear when he saw that a demon surrounded by a cloud of cold was walking straight towards them, but there was another one from around the corner of the building. Hiroto said that he would shoot there. They would start to gather around him. He prepared a gun and said that he would take them as far away from this place as possible. When he stood up, they were already surrounded by ice magic. The worker said that he admired his courage, but he would die like that. He became sad and gloomy, saying that with his powers, he would not defeat such monsters. But if one-on-one, he grabbed his hand and asked Hiroto to leave him and go. He began to shake with fear and said, although he only has an F rank, but he is a hunter, it is immediately clear which of the two is more important. MC clenched his teeth and asked, that is, if he runs away, the employee will die? He decided that he had enough of this. He remembered the words that the hunters would arrive soon. Akira's image appeared in front of him. That look again. He said that the employee had better hide quickly and began to run away, and he looked at him in surprise and said to stop. The protagonist ran straight into a huge cloud of ice. He held his gun forward, and then a short and loud sound was heard. Both monsters looked down in surprise and stopped. Hiroto was running there, raising his hand up. He began to zigzag away from them at high speed, but the demons were just as fast, and caught up with him. The employee was left alone, and Hiroto said, "It will soon be hot there." He jumped up deftly, jumping off the walls while the monsters were trying to catch him. They chased him and found him, coming out from behind the corner. While one of the demons briefly lost sight of him and looked back, the main character raised his dagger and, jumping, stuck the weapon into the monster's forehead. He held onto the pole and moved along the demon's head, cutting it. Then the monster didn't even have time to react, and blood was already pouring out of the wound. The demon began to fall with a loud sound, and the hanging protagonist said that this is the first. A group of hunters walked through a cave with crystals. A-rank spearman called Yuzuki, and said that she owns incredible fire magic. The dissatisfied A-rank sorceress asked, "Is it true?" That is, if a magic swordsman has a little more flame, then he is immediately better than a real mage. Another guy asked, "If she says so, then maybe she should learn fencing herself? Her skills are so great that any ordinary swordsman cannot compare with her. Although their level is lower, they are also strong. It seems to him that with her on the team, they can conquer any dungeon, right?" Yuzuki looked away sadly, and then answered the surprised hunters, "Yes, they should try." The sorceress grinned and said, "Geniuses like her do not understand how much effort ordinary hunters like them have to put in." They answered her, it had never happened before, that students conquer the entire dungeon. That's right, although even without a team, she could do it. Yuzuki said she understands that not everyone is so talented, but they can become like that if they train hard. The sorceress became angry and bared her teeth. She screamed, "Such noble words, she hears this from an S rank, she is invincible without much effort." The A rank healer asked, "Didn't she know? Yuzuki works much harder than anyone in the academy. Sometimes she trains at night. Doesn't the sorceress think that she shouldn't say that? Every morning she gets up before everyone else, and goes to train in the hall with a sword. Then she studies magic in the library until late at night." After these words, the sorceress looked at Yuzuki in surprise, and the spearman asked her to tell her something. "What does she need power for? She has already achieved so much." Yuzuki looked away and did not want to answer. "But then she told me that when she was a child, she was bullied at the orphanage. She sat and cried, then one boy came to her aid. The healer said that it was amazing. The guy who was bullied found the strength to protect her. It was hard to even imagine." She looked down sadly. When it was time for the test, she received rank S, and he rank F. She was very happy that he helped her. Now she confidently said that she decided to become a person who can protect the weak. The sorceress frowned, and then grinned, and he was very brave if he protected the girl from bullying. "Well, let him train to death. What's the problem with assembling a team?" The girl shook her head. "Everyone has ranks from B to A. If they all put in more effort, they can handle everything. But unfortunately, that guy doesn't have a chance." She said this leaving the portal. After all, he has rank F. As soon as Yuzuki passed through the portal, she was surprised and horrified. Her team members came out and were also surprised, asking, "What?" A huge crowd of monsters were chasing the worker and stomping loudly, and he was screaming. The main character at this time jumped down next to the killed giant, turned around and thought that he was able to kill him with one blow to the head. But then another monster appeared in front of him. He began to run towards him as if mad. Hiroto frowned. His agility is 22, he was able to dodge the blow of the giant's hand. He himself will not be able to cope with them. He ran up and then began to slide quickly and flew right between the legs of the monster. Hiroto jumped up and ended up on the monster's head. He put a gun to the back of his head and screamed, and from such a distance? A muffled shot was heard. They froze for a moment, and then the monster screamed angrily, and raised his hands up. It grabbed Hiroto and squeezed him in its paws. He immediately froze and was covered in ice. Of course, the wound was shallow and only affected the skin. The main character broke free with a dagger and wounded the monster. That's what hunters are for. The demon screamed loudly, and then fell. Hiroto was on his head with a severed and bloody hand. He turned around and said, "Look, now they're attacking in a crowd?" Several angry monsters were running towards him. At this time, Yuzuki was also fighting with a sword and strong fire magic. She was killing giants, while her team members were tiredly sitting on the ground. There were already 2 corpses behind Yuzuki. She asked, "Where did so many of them come from?" Kinuya replied that it must be some kind of disaster. Yuzuki approached the worker and asked, "In which direction was that student?" He pointed in that direction with trembling hands. She said she would help him, and the guy tried to tell her to stop. By this point, Hiroto was sitting tired on the ground, surrounded by dead and bloody demons. He began to look around and inspect the wounded monsters and the snowy ground, saying that he was finally done. His level was increased, Great Hunter level 17. His health and mana also increased. The skills Pain Resistance, Fearlessness and Mana Awakening were level 9. Strength increased by 3, Spirit by 4, Agility, Endurance and Magic Power by 2. The protagonist looked at the monsters shining with ice and was glad that he was done. He decided that he needed to return to the car and began to walk along an absolutely empty and dead street. It was already sunset and strange sounds came from the monsters. Dark liquid gushed out of them. They suddenly opened their eyes, in which there was nothing. A huge crowd of monsters began to come to life. They woke up one after another. A portal appeared right in the empty space, to which they all walked, as if they were controlled by that liquid. The protagonist walked forward tiredly and remembered that the essentials were in the car that was destroyed. He received a notification, 12 hours left before his death. The girl ran, stomping her heels. She looked back and thought, which way was that student? The worker pointed to her, but there was a fork in front of Yuzuki. She stopped and began to use her skill, level 9 search. Then she immediately understood the direction and quickly ran forward. Yuzuki seemed to follow the navigator that created the search skill. Only S-rank hunters have such a skill. She looked for it, looking around. Yuzuki received a message from the gods, monsters like in the game, a dungeon like in the game. In addition, a window appeared, similar to the game's status. She grinned. If this is a made-up story, someone clearly has a bad imagination. But then she immediately became sad. She was able to get power. No, it was given to her. She remembered the bullying in the orphanage. This world is just unfair. When she was a child, there was one guy who fought against such injustice. She thought he was a real hero, but she did not want to rely on others anymore. Then she began to protect him. Now he is not able to protect anyone. She remembered his battered face. Their world is full of different crazy creatures. That's why she received such strength to resist them instead of him. She confidently decided that she promises, next to her, no one will cry. The girl continued to run and finally saw him. She wanted to ask if he was okay, but asked in surprise, "What?" She stood in front of him and asked, "Hiroto?" He was also surprised and did not answer right away. After a while they were driving in a car. The worker apologized for having to give them a ride, but he was told that there was nothing wrong with that. Their car was destroyed by a Wendigo. Besides, it was not difficult for them. Everyone was riding in their seats, while the main character was lying in the trunk. He was grateful that they were giving him a ride, but why were they treating him so badly? Spearman said, who would have thought that this brave guy would be someone Yuzuki knew? Plus, his skills were rank D rank before he even entered the academy. He never thought that he could have such strength. If he had such strength before entering, he must be no weaker than them at the academy. The sorceress mockingly asked, maybe he would still take him into their team? Spearman said that was nonsense. The only thing that surprised him was his strength before entering. He raised his head arrogantly and mockingly. After all, Hiroto was an ordinary F rank. Indeed, he can't achieve much. He's already close to the maximum level of his rank. The sorceress asked, F rank? She looked at him and said, she's so sorry, he has a handsome face. The healer said that she was cruel as always. Who would choose guys by their rank? She asked, what's wrong with that? She doesn't want to be with a guy who is weaker than her, and she doesn't even think about guys who have no future. Spearman asked Yuzuki what kind of relationship she has with this guy. She hesitated, and then said that he is a special person to her. He chuckled, wow, special? Yuzuki said that they were always together before. He protected her when she was bullied. Spearman said maliciously that now he is a weak boy who is unable to protect her. Everyone looked at him with displeasure, and Yuzuki said that it is true, so he does not need to protect her. She told Hiroto to call her when he goes to the dungeon. She will join. He just listened to her, and Kinuya said that she should not confuse personal relationships with work. As one of the strongest hunters in the country, she has obligations. She should not worry about such a small thing. But she said no, for her, who has never had a family, he is the only family. The spearman was terribly saddened by these words, but said that he understood her. They continued driving. When it was already night, Hiroto looked out the window. They arrived at a beautiful academy building, where every detail was perfect. They began to take out things. The spearman called him, calling him a newbie, and with a smile said to come to the common room. With a very malicious face, he said that he wanted to talk to him. Among the ruins of the city, new monsters wandered. Under them the ground was covered with cracks. All the dead were inside a glowing circle of magic. They moved strangely and could not get out. The magic circle became gigantic and covered a large area. A wall of magic appeared in front of the monsters and they began to dry up like fruits, and then explode and leave bloody puddles with splashes. Inside this circle, at night, puddles of blood stretched upward, each drop it rose up. The dark liquid gathered into one mass, creating balls that were dark and creepy. From these balls appeared the limbs of a monster, and then ahead, it was a giant demon, similar to a bull. It went down and jumped loudly, lifting up stones. Behind it was a whole army of such monsters. The city of ruins was filled with these terrible creatures. They approached the portal and began to enter it, then a bright flash appeared inside and the portal changed, became much brighter and larger, spreading shock waves. At night in the academy, the training hall was empty, only 5 people were there. The healer was worried and said to listen to him. Earlier on the first day, newcomers did not have training fights. Kinuya grinned creepily and said they, as seniors, should hammer the rules into their newcomers. With this approach, he is sure that they can better prepare him for real battles. The healer looked away and said that she did not mind, but he thought, it seems there is personal hostility. Yuzuki frowned and covered him with her body. Kinuya said, he is an F rank, and his combat rating is D rank. With such indicators, going alone to Wendigo is just crazy. He has no other choice, they have to deal with this as soon as possible. For that he is willing to personally help him. The sorceress said that she does not care if he was bullied, it was hard for her too. It is time for them to stop this show. By the way, even their genius had problems, right? Yuzuki shook her head and said that there was no one stronger than her in the committee. The sorceress passed by and said that she really does not like her. Kinuya took the wooden weapon and said that these will be enough. They can trust him, the sooner they finish the better for everyone. He threw the stick and told them to take this. Also he apologizes if he causes some injuries, it is for his sake. They looked at him, and then Yuzuki stepped forward and said to stop, she is against this training battle. He said with disgust and arrogance that he was doing this as the president of the Public Moral Committee, who was supposed to be in charge of maintaining discipline among the students. In the future, if he continued to take such risks, he could endanger the entire group. Yuzuki screamed that bullying a newbie was not the answer. He would not be able to stand up to an experienced hunter. There had to be another way. Such measures used by the military had not been used for a long time. Kinuya said that they did not use military methods, this was what hunters did. She angrily said that as the chairman, he was responsible for raising newbies. The girl remained silent and frowned, she was a second-year graduate of the Hunter Academy. And besides, she was the vice president of the student council, and a member of the Public Moral Committee, so she could decide. She said that she forbade this fight and would not allow anyone to dare bully the weak. The hall was very quiet, everyone was silent. Kinuya pursed his lips and threw away the stick, he began to leave, and the healer followed him. Yuzuki and Hiroto were left alone. She apologized and said that in this academy, a person's abilities decide everything. She also turned away and began to leave, saying that he had a lot to go through, the weak have their own way of fighting, he did not need to overexert himself. The protagonist was left alone. He looked around and frowned, thinking that he should clean up there. He walked along the dark corridor and asked where the dorm was. Behind him, Kinuya told him to wait, although Yuzuki said her opinion, but he thought he needed to be taught a lesson. Hiroto turned around and asked, so he should fight him? Kinuya said no, he would just teach him a lesson in discipline. Hiroto frowned and asked, then can they begin? Yes. He wanted to say that he did not mind, but the protagonist quickly appeared behind him and hit him in the neck, then he fell unconscious. The protagonist looked at this indifferently, and then grabbed him and lifted him up again. He continued walking, leaving him lying in the hallway. His name is Oamichi Kinuya. Although he was born into a special family, his name is completely ordinary. He has many servants and a large mansion. He was born into a family of hereditary elite hunters and always received the best. He knew from childhood that he was special. Even when a huge man pestered him, he was scared and did not react right away, but he could always defend himself with one blow. His enemies were always much weaker, he also received wounds. But he realized with surprise that he was incredibly strong when he threw the man into the next building and smashed several cars. He was pleased to know this and he smirked. From that moment everything began. Rank A is undoubtedly a sign that he is an elite hunter. It was inevitable that he entered the prestigious academy for hunters without problems. But even in such a place, during classes, he could defeat several students with his strength and skills and throw them up. He always remained special and strong. It seems that he was chosen by the gods themselves. Then he walked down the hallway, and for the first time in his life he could see someone who was more talented than him, and she was beautiful. She was S rank, in other words, she was superior to him in everything. He turned around and looked at her. Then he realized that she was the perfect comrade that should be by his side. He smiled like a man and wanted to get her. She was just like him, special. She was the perfect comrade that the gods sent him. In the morning, he was still lying in the hallway and woke up. He asked what happened. There was an official meeting in the Great Hall. All the students were gathered there. The teacher said that he apologized for gathering without warning, but it seemed that signs of a crowd of demons were found in the academy's dungeon. The students began to discuss it anxiously, and the hall was filled with a buzz. The man continued, as they already know, they still have a lot to learn about the dungeons, but he can say one thing for sure. Right now, the mana concentration level in the dungeon has reached a dangerous level. Thanks to the special artifacts, they were able to find out that there was a huge army of monsters in the dungeon now. If they did nothing, all those demons would break out, and who knows what kind of disaster they would bring with them. Now he saw only one way to prevent this. He clenched his fist and said that they had to destroy the demons in the dungeon, reduce the mana concentration. Time was short, so they couldn't wait for help from other associations. All the students began to discuss this. They were mobilizing the students. Seriously? Of course, this was discussed during the admissions, but isn't this too much? Are they crazy? Are they saying that there is an emergency now? The teacher said that he understood their concerns, but asked them to have courage. The teachers came forward. He said that all the instructors were elite hunters. They and a squad of students would be in charge of certain areas of the dungeon. Kinuya and Yuzuki listened to him with doubt. After that, the teacher said that was all. They should now return to their classrooms and prepare for battle, awaiting further instructions from their instructors. The instructors and students were discussing this. Hiroto thought that this happened on his first day at the academy. He was already in trouble. The instructor apologized and said that he chose a bad time to come. Well, if his abilities were really that good, he could quickly become an elite hunter. Well, she would introduce him to Class A. Everyone turned around and asked, "Is he in Class A? Isn't he an F rank rookie?" They heard that he had pretty good stats, but he was still only an F rank. Why would they put a guy like that in Class A? If he was an F rank, he wouldn't be able to go higher than level 25. Hiroto remembered that Yuzuki had warned him about the effects of abilities, but he simply calmed down. Yuzuki called him, and the instructor said that it was interesting. The girl said that they needed to talk. He should make time for her. They started to leave together, and Kinuya looked at it with jealousy and hostility. They went outside, and she said that a catastrophe would most likely happen in that dungeon. He asked what? The girl wasn't sure, but she felt it. Probably her ability was influencing it. The protagonist asked then, what did she suggest doing? The girl answered that her group would deal with the monsters in the depths of the dungeon, and he would destroy them with the group closer to the surface. He said maybe it would be better to tell the instructors about this and coordinate it with their plan. But Yuzuki didn't think they would take one of the students' premonitions seriously. She said it worriedly, but he might not believe her. If there really was a god in the world, then she felt like he had specially chosen her. She turned to him and grabbed his hands, asking him to tell her if there was a problem. When a disaster happens, everyone panics. She squeezed his hands. Hell begins in the dungeon, and death falls on everyone. Many corpses and the dead will inevitably appear. But he shouldn't worry, but remember that she will always protect him. They stood in silence while the leaves rustled in the wind. At this time, the other students were sitting on the grass. One of them asked, they decided to mobilize the students. What nonsense, right, Urabe? Shouldn't they just not go? He listened to them and asked displeasedly, are they complete idiots? If they didn't show up, they would be expelled from the academy. They said it was true, the job of a hunter was dangerous, but the pay was good. It seemed like there wouldn't even be a reward this time. They asked, is he lying? Kinuya said they lacked manners, and Urabe asked what? He looked down on them and said they were capable guys. Urabe said mockingly, wow, it's Oamichi, does he have something for them? He said he had a proposal for them. He wanted them. No, he wanted them to help him get rid of a certain guy. In front of him, there was only Hiroto, so he interfered with the lives of 3 people at once, each with their own plans. All the students would have to face danger, but each had their own opinion on the events that would take place in the most dangerous dungeon filled with demons. At that moment, the events that would cause a huge number of deaths of the students and instructors of the Hunter Academy would begin. Hiroto 5 received a notification on his phone. There were 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds left until the Demon Lord hunt began. awaiting confirmation from the participants. 1 hour ago, the students arrived at the location where the portal opened. The teacher said, "Okay, those who have combat experience will go with the instructors into the depths of the dungeon. The captain of this group will be Yuzuki, the rest will stay on the upper levels and exterminate the low-level demons. They are not dangerous, but there will be a lot of them. During the hunt, they must strictly follow the teacher's instructions. However, the students from Class A go with the main group into the very depths of the dungeon. Since they are considered the elite hunters of their academy, after these words, all the students became nervous. Everyone was preparing right next to the portal. He said that they will begin the attack at exactly 12 o'clock. All the students listened to him, and one girl raised her hand, asking if she can ask a question. He answered, "Of course," and the girl asked why they are going into the depths of the dungeon. With an S rank like Yuzuki, there wouldn't be any problems, but not everyone can handle such strong monsters. The teacher said that he didn't expect them to capture the depths at first. Their job is to support the main attack squad. For example, guarding the wounded while they are being healed, or destroying demons that the main squad didn't finish off. The students of Class B and below who hunt on the upper floors are not in any danger. The protagonist thought, if everything goes as Yuzuki said about the disaster, this attack will not end well. She was not sure about it, then MC asked, "Isn't she in danger too?" It's hard to sleep when you realize that your close friend can be in mortal danger. She told him not to worry, she will protect him. Now Hiroto thought he was lucky to be in the same group as Yuzuki. But then the teacher said that Ijima and Ito will not participate in the attack on the depths of the dungeon. They were shocked by this statement. They will be part of the support group for the squad on the middle floors. The protagonist asked with displeasure, "What, but why?" The teacher said that their job will be to ensure that the monsters from the middle floors do not escape to the upper floors. Ito asked indignantly and displeasedly, "What does this mean? They are also A-class students, then why can't they go with everyone?" He said that even if this is an emergency, the current strength should be enough to clear the depths. He frowned and said that the members of the attack party on the lower floors should have a lot of experience in real battles. Even if they are A-class, they do not have enough strength and experience for such battles. He rubbed his forehead tiredly and said that they should take this as practice. They carefully select all the members of the squad that will be profitable to invest in. Ito asked in confusion, "Invest?" The teacher hid his disdain and asked, "They are E and F rank, right? Considering their abilities as hunters, they have no future." Ito was horrified by these words. After a while, they all stood in front of the portal, and when they entered, they immediately began to fight. The students killed strange demons, they tried to cut them with axes, and the squads of monsters killed with magic and a group of swordsmen. 2 guys decided to split up, then they jumped to the sides, and the demons stopped in fear. A huge stream of flame filled the space and burned all the monsters. The magicians did not stop working, and then they joyfully screamed, looking at the corpses of the monsters. The leader of the squad told them to prepare for Formation A. They all worked together, the knights protected them with a shield, and the swordsmen killed the monsters. They all worked in pairs and easily dealt with the demons. In a large cave filled with crystals lay dead demons. After that, even more dangerous monsters appeared. The student asked, "Do they think that if there are many of them, they will defeat them?" He threw a weapon at the horse-like monster. 2 demons had wounds in their heads and winced in pain. The student finished off the monster, and it fell to the ground, covering everything with blood. He opened his cloak, showing daggers, and confidently said for his entire squad to attack. They screamed and confidently began to advance towards the monsters, holding out their weapons. The instructors were watching them. One of them rubbed his chin and said, "Yeah, their manners are terrible, but he can't deny that they are very capable. Maybe they can even get letters of recommendation to the best guilds in the country." The second teacher looked at the happy students standing on the pile of corpses and said, "It's true, there is no point in them remaining students." Urabe came up and called the teacher, and the teacher asked to call him instructor, but the teacher repeated that he did not care. He asked, "This is a demon extermination mission, right? They want to not hold back and kill as many as possible, so they will leave their group." He asked, "Do they want to leave the group?" And then he shouted menacingly, "Are they doing it again? Do they want to make many mistakes again?" Urabe turned away and said, "What's the point of fighting these weak monsters? If that's what they want, they can stay and do it, but they just want to kill everyone." The instructor said that their skills are not bad, but their behavior and teamwork are terrible. The student laughed and asked, "What did he say?" "They don't care about any of that, they will do what they want." The instructor got angry and said that he is in charge of this area, they can't do that. But Kazuya told the teacher not to get angry. He took his shoulder with a smile. He asked, Oamichi? He said that they already have the skills to become elite hunters. It will be a waste of talent if they continue to restrict them. He is leading them. They will complete their tasks. He asked, in that case, there will be no problem? The instructor said if he thought so there shouldn't be any problems, especially since they were on the upper floors. Well then, fine. Kazuya smiled and said then they'll go. He led a group of guys who were proud and satisfied, and Kazuya was looking forward to the future with an evil look. He said their target was on the middle floors. At this time, Hiroto was with it too. Urabe asked Oamichi, and he answered, what? He wanted to make sure, if they helped him, he hoped that Kazuya would keep his promise and introduce them to his father. Of course they trusted him, but his father was the head of the largest hunter guild, right? Kazuya repeated that he would keep his promise. After all, they are a hunter guild, the fawn of the black dragon, doing dirty work. All the students began to laugh, setting up an accident with a weak hunter, looting, stealing, or putting pressure on other guilds? It doesn't matter, they do everything, even contract killing. Urabe smirked and said that there are no rules in the dungeon. As long as he is willing to pay, there are no problems. Kazuya said that in that case, he has good news. Ijima is currently in the middle levels. He slyly said that there is another girl with him. They should get rid of both of them, and at the top, they will say that both were torn apart by monsters. Kazuya said that they can do whatever they want, and they were happy and said that they are very grateful to him. At this time, on the middle level of the dungeon, there were wendigos that the students were fighting. Yuzuki was there now. She quickly separated from the squad and ran past the monster, waving her sword and her fiery aura. She stood bravely in front of the giant who was afraid of her. She wrapped herself in a spiral of magic and used the air path. After that, she put her sword to the throat of the demon and swung. Looking at it with hatred, she left behind a large whirlwind of fire that cut the monster in half. All the students were shocked. The healer said that this was great. Hiroto was looking at them, and it is said behind them that this was to be expected from the strongest hunter in the academy. She put her hand on her hip and was surprised that Yuzuki defeated the monster without any problems. Yes, they are on a completely different level. Probably if there were more monsters, she would not notice the difference. Hiroto thought that this was very cool, but is it something surprising? In front of the group that the girl was walking to, there were 3 monsters, cut in half and with their heads cut off. Ito asked, did he say something? He said that she misheard, but he wanted to ask her something. She asked him to call her Morano, and he asked, what? She answered with a smile, that was her name, Morano Itu. It was nice to meet him. She extended her hand and asked him to call her by her first name. He extended his hand too. She said that they were comrades, so there was no need for formalities. They shook hands and he said that his name was Ijima Hiroto. She could call him by his first name too. He repeated that he had a question. There used to be a guy with glasses on Yuzuki's team, right? She asked, was he talking about Oamichi? Now he and the instructors are in charge of the second years. The protagonist answered that he understood, and she looked at him in surprise. He asked one more thing, was it okay that they shook hands? She asked in surprise, what? And he said that ever since the orphanage, when he got an F rank, he was bullied. This academy is no exception. She listened to him with surprise and said, of course, everything is fine. He was surprised by her friendliness, and Morano said that she was an E rank, so he should not worry and patted him on the back. He did not know how to react, but he smiled and thought that she was a good person. In the cave, there were many pink crystals that were glowing. They were left alone. Morano said, to be honest, they have such a humble task, just to make sure that the monsters do not leave the middle floors. It feels like they are just observers. They are making sure that the demons from the lower floors do not get to the upper floors. He drank water and asked, does she think they will pass? Morano understands that this is an important task. In any case, if they appear there, they just need to inform the others and they will be dealt with immediately. She heard a strange sound and tensed up. A hum came from the cave. She turned around and asked, what? A huge monster was standing in front of them. She screamed, a minotaur? They should not appear in such a dungeon. Really? She said in horror that ordinary students wouldn't be able to handle such a monster. What should they do? They should tell the others. But then she turned around in fear and saw the second monster. The minotaurs came out and surrounded them. Morano said, no, it won't work. It looks like they won't even be able to escape from there. The protagonist took his dagger and frowned, saying that means they just have to kill them. He started walking towards the minotaur, and Morano screamed and called him. He turned around. She swung her spear and said that in the modern world, sacrificing for a girl has gone out of fashion, he can just rely on her. She confidently grabbed the spear and prepared for battle. She was very small in front of the huge, evil Minotaur, who raised his weapon to hit her. When he brought the axe down, hitting the ground hard, she jumped high into the air and flipped in the air, dodging the attack. She looked at him confidently and began to approach, waving her spear and trying to wound his neck. The Minotaur did not like this and he growled, and then began to swing his axe again, and Morano deftly and elegantly dodged his weapon. The main character admired her and thought that it was cool, no unnecessary movements, she sees every little thing, amazing dexterity. Morano sank to the ground, her abilities are simply incredible, she prepared for a new attack and put her spear forward. She began to run screaming towards the Minotaur, and he just grinned. Her spear did not wound him, she was too weak. He swung his axe while she was dodging. The monster's axe was already close to her, when Morano put her spear forward and the monster himself ran into her weapon. Blood gushed out. He growled loudly in pain as she continued to press, then she jumped back and the Minotaur began to fall and blood poured out of it. She looked menacingly at the second monster, and it even got scared of her, and then began to run away. She swung her spear and said that everything is fine now. Hiroto thought, she is an E rank, he did not think she could pierce the Minotaur's skin. He asked, her last strike, how did she manage to pierce the Minotaur? Morano answered that the hybrid's weak point is the throat. She used the opponent's strength against him to strike the throat. He looked at the dead and bleeding monster, saying that this is not bad, this is completely different from what they learned in training. Morano answered. Exactly. That's why she is in a class. She asked, does he know the swordsman Ituitusai? MC asked, is she talking about the great swordsman of the Musashi Miyamoto period? Morano said there is a theory that during this period, not only swordsmanship was widespread, but also spear mastery. She can't say for sure what her ancestors possessed. In any case, she is the daughter of a noble samurai family. Morano was very proud when she told, but despite this, she is still an ordinary E-rank hunter. She has studied the weak points of many types of monsters and uses unusual techniques. She was somehow able to defeat a monster. The protagonist said that instructor should reconsider his attitude towards her. She has good knowledge and skills, he clearly underestimates her. Morano took a deep breath, and then shouted loudly that he was a fool. He is a real fool, a fool with innate talent. She demands equality, equal human rights, equal opportunities. She shouted desperately and loudly, why in their time, the presence of talent decides everything. Hiroto looked at her in surprise, and Morano exhaled and said that she felt better. Does he want to try? But he looked at her doubtfully, and said that he refused. But he smiled, he did not think of her as a bad person, she was very interesting. Morano said sadly that she had undergone grueling training since childhood. It was very offensive to her when her family's skills were mocked. He looked at her understandingly, and she said that with her he was definitely safe. Morano clenched her fist and said decisively that at least she could guarantee him this, she was the strongest among the first years. Urabe said, so that's it. She turned and asked, what? And why were they there? Urabe and his team laughed maliciously, looking at her. He greeted her casually and arrogantly. She said with horror, Urabe? He said she was a young star who won all the training battles. Although she has an E rank, she is developing quickly, but does he think she already understood? This is her limit, with the right training, anyone can defeat her in just a year. She became angry with resentment and asked why they came? He said in a drawn-out voice, how to explain it, their boss has business with Ijima. Kinuya said, do they know that accidents in dungeons are not uncommon? He said maliciously that this is the perfect moment to resolve all their differences. Hiroto thought and remembered how he hit him, so he wants to take revenge for that incident. Kinuya said, what happens in the dungeon stays there, and Urabe said that they should not expect a quick death. He took out daggers and smirked, saying that they were ordered to torture them as long as possible. Morano thought. That's bad, she heard a lot of bad things about them. She can't believe that they are so crazy, and she became very angry. The protagonist stepped forward and said before they start, what will happen to the girl? She asked Hiroto. Kinuya said that's what it is, it seems. They became friends while they were in the team. In that case, he wouldn't mind if they had fun with her? The protagonist saw many nasty looks and became angry. A bright aura appeared around him. He loudly pushed off the ground and instantly approached them. With a fierce look, he was in front of Kinuya, who did not notice him. At the same second, he powerfully hit him in the jaw, Kinuya's face was greatly deformed, and his glasses were broken. Morano thought, this is bad. She heard a lot of bad rumors about these guys. She can't believe that they are so crazy. Morano frowned and thought, what should she do? She has to protect Hiroto before he escapes. Suddenly, a stream of energy passed by her, and she stumbled. The bright energy moved forward with purpose and struck Omichi's head. Less than a second passed and the protagonist struck Urabe. Again, less than a second passed and Hiroto moved forward. The guys looked around and asked in confusion, what disappeared? At that moment, the protagonist continued moving, pushing from one side to the other and striking the belligerent guys. 2.5 seconds passed and Morano asked in surprise, what? In front of her were the beaten guys and Hiroto was walking forward. Morano looked at him and fell to the floor. The protagonist turned around and asked, is she okay, Morano? She did not answer, only opened her mouth in surprise. At this time, monsters were gathering on the lower levels of the dungeon. At the head, a man stood on a large stone with his hands raised up. Green energy was spreading in different directions and spells were heard. A funnel appeared above the man's head, and the monsters looked at it carefully. Suddenly, it changed its color and the monster's body exploded, leaving a bloody explosion. The monsters began to explode, splashing everything with their blood. Suddenly, the man who was reading the spell raised his head up and repeated the fate of the monsters, exploded. A large pool of blood began to soak into the mantle lying on the ground. Energy began to emanate from this and rise upward. Suddenly, it illuminated everything around and moved on. After a while, energy flows leaked out into human buildings. Behind a large metal door, the bodies of creatures were stored in large flasks. One of the vessels contained a body bound with strong chains, and the others contained huge monsters. The body of one creature without arms and legs and a large hole in the stomach was further away. This was the body of the sixth demon lord, Vaz Baltan. An energy flow made its way through the half-open doors and entered the flask with the lord. The flask broke and Vaz Baltan came to life, tearing off his eyes. At that moment, on the upper floors of the dungeon, an energy flow carried a demon underwater. The creature in large metal armor turned out to be a follower of the sixth demon lord, the Black Demon. It walked forward, smashing stones with its heavy boots. Rank A+, meaning that many guilds refuse to raid this monster. The power of the Black Demon strikes fear into even experienced hunters. A group of students cannot defeat it. Its appearance marked the beginning of a catastrophe. It looked forward and flashed its fiery eyes. After a while, there was a mountain of monster corpses in the dungeon. The guy stretched and exhaled. The man smiled and said, and he is not nervous at all. The guy smiled and replied that at first he was very worried, because it was called an emergency meeting, but surprisingly it was quite calm there. He put his hands on his waist and replied, well, this kind of work suits them more than dangerous battles. Suddenly, he thoughtfully looked up, from where rays of light appeared. A black demon was heading towards them. The guy asked, who is it? At that moment, the main character undressed the guys who attacked him and tied them with a strong rope. Morano looked at them and scratched her head. She smiled and said, great, everyone is tied up. Hiroto answered, yeah. Morano looked at him and said that she heard rumors that his strength is on par with experienced hunters. Hiroto, but now she is sure that his abilities definitely surpass the level of students. Hiroto turned around and looked at her carefully. Morano waved her hand and asked, let him listen, and maybe he will share a secret. The protagonist turned away and asked what kind. Morano answered, his incredible strength. Hiroto answered, no, he cannot. Morano asked in surprise, why is that? If he wants, she will tell about the weak points of monsters? Is it really such a terrible secret? The protagonist answered dissatisfiedly, something like that. After a while, they saw the shadow of a black demon. Hiroto said, just when they dealt with one problem, a new one appeared. The black demon came closer to them and Morano asked, a rare monster? She had never seen such a monster before. Hiroto looked at him in fear and remembered Yuzuki's words that a catastrophe would most likely happen in this dungeon. At present, a system window with characteristics appeared in front of the protagonist. The higher the dexterity, the better his perception. Ijime Hiroto is level 17. He is a great hunter with 28 points of strength, 24 points of dexterity, endurance and spirit, 27 points of magic power. The black demon grabbed the hilt of the sword with his hand and began to pull it out of the sheath. Hiroto and Morano looked at this in fear. The demon took out the sword and quickly rushed to run to the side. The protagonist pushed off the ground and moved behind the demon, who instantly turned around and evaporated back. It swung its sword, but Hiroto managed to jump back. Large stones flew in different directions. This wounded the protagonist. He stood up and pressed his palm to his shoulder. Hiroto looked at the demon and thought displeasedly, this one is stronger than him. He won't be able to deal with this so easily. Morano stood behind him and looked ahead questioningly. She shouted, Hiroto. But the chances of winning are very small. However, the protagonist pushed off the ground and quickly ran towards the monster. He took out a small bag from his inside pocket and threw it at the demon. The bag contains a special mixture of hot pepper and mandrake root. If you use fire magic on it. Hiroto put 2 fingers forward and screamed. A stream of fire headed towards the monster and approached the bag. An explosion occurred. It's good that he took it with him. The protagonist thought, this is the end. Suddenly the fire began to settle and the burning demon came forward. Hiroto looked at it in fear and asked, is there a skeleton inside the armor? It swung its large sword, and the protagonist blocked it with a small blade. The blade flew back and crashed into the ground. The monster threw the protagonist back and he thought, strong. It rushed to quickly run towards Hiroto, and he clenched his fists. He grabbed the demon by the hand and spun it around and threw it to the ground. The demon started shaking, when suddenly Hiroto grabbed the helmet of this one and jerked it sharply, breaking its neck. The protagonist sat on the body of this one and chuckled slightly. Morano stood behind and looked at it in confusion. She asked, did he break his neck? The protagonist stood up and said, his rank is F. Of course, he wanted to become stronger. He remembered how, as a little boy, he trained and read a lot of literature. And for this, he trained a lot. Hiroto frowned and looked ahead. Not long before, the black demon walked forward and killed everyone he met on the way. Behind him lay the bodies of dead people, and in front of him stood frightened students and shouted, what is this? Where did this come from? The monster swung his sword and immediately cut the bodies of people. A loud, heart-rending scream was heard in the dungeon. The students saw this and asked, what happened? They're dead. The instructor stepped forward and ordered everyone to get ready. Isn't this what they became hunters for? The girl looked at her in fear and screamed, but they weren't hunters yet. She asked them to wait, wasn't this the disaster they were talking about? The instructor answered, that's right. She screamed, this is a disaster. So let them come to their senses already. The instructor exhaled and waved her hand and said they asked for help from the Hunters Guild. If they can't defeat this, then they just need to hold out until they arrive. And they will take care of it. The students took out their shields and covered their bodies with them. The instructor looked around and said, she will take command. She looked to the side and said, so they too, we need to try to make sure everyone stays alive. The students looked at her in confusion and she said, besides, there is a hunter with them right now who has reached rank B. Instructor Godai is there too. He pulled his sword forward and looked at them carefully. The students shouted happily, looking at him. They said happily, right, they can definitely handle the instructor. The participants clenched their fists and shouted, they did too. Suddenly, the tip of the sword pierced the instructor's head and she looked forward in fear. Blood spurted in all directions, and she fell to the ground. The students looked at her in fear, and the girl turned around and screamed, but the instructor. At that moment, the demon knocked Godai to the ground and walked with his feet on his body. The students looked at this in fear and heavy boots pierced Godai's body. The guys screamed loudly in fear and covered their mouths with their hands. A moment later, the demon moved further, into the depths of the dungeon, chopping up the bodies of the students. Yuzuki frowned and looked at this. Suddenly, someone put a hand on her shoulder and said, Yuzuki, even the instructor couldn't handle it. But she can beat this one, right? Yuzuki looked to the side and replied, perhaps even she could lose. Her unique skill, the fierce divine dragon. The little girl stood surrounded by fire. The skill allows her to infuse a great divine dragon into her body, and temporarily double her stats. The boy lowered his head and said, he knows how high the price is for using the skill. Her lifespan is decreasing. However, only she can defeat this one. The boy begs, let her sacrifice her life for them. His hand was on Yuzuki's shoulder. It is unknown whether his lifespan is really decreasing. But according to scientists, there is every reason to believe that it is true. Yuzuki squeezed the handle of her weapon and heard, thank you, Yuzuki. She thought, terrible selfish people, they are simply disgusting. Yuzuki narrowed her eyes and said, activating the fierce divine dragon skill. Fire covered her body and she said she will take this one on herself. Rearguard, let them provide support. She must do this. Right now, she is like a hero from a fairy tale. Yuzuki took out her sword and thought, this role was destined for her. She looked ahead and thought about her destiny. The demon walked towards her, clutching the hilt of the sword. At that moment, Morano said, this dungeon belongs to the academy. The monsters there should only be hybrids. She looked at the demon's body and asked, in that case, where would the undead come from? Moreover, such a strong one. The protagonist remembered Yuzuki's words and said that he himself would like to know. He is worried about Yuzuki. Therefore, he is heading to the lower levels. Morano looked at him in surprise, and then smiled and asked, is he worried about the strongest huntress in the academy? Although, she can probably help her. Well, she is not up to their level. Morano placed her hand on the stone and said, so, she will stay there. Since she was a child, all the time she trained. Morano recalled the moments of her life that were like broken glass in her memories. Tears appeared in her eyes and she said, it turned out to be useless. Suddenly, she took out her phone and looked at it questioningly. A window appeared on her phone with information that a strong thirst for power was detected. Access to the soul of Ito Mineo was obtained. She looked at it with fear and thought, thirst for power? Morano carefully looked at her screen, when suddenly Hiroto asked, did something happen? Morano showed him her screen and said, she does not know, it looks like some kind of virus. Suddenly she screamed and waved her hand said she meant. Well, let him not think that she does not visit any obscene sites. The protagonist thought that she was very interesting. He stood up and thought so. Morano asked before he left, can I promise him one thing? Hiroto asked in surprise, promise? Morano said, yeah, she hasn't had time to thank him for saving her yet, so he shouldn't die. She extended her hand forward and said she will repay him. So he should definitely come back. The protagonist asked, what? Morano said, well. She was embarrassed and said, when he comes back, she will treat him to coffee in their cafeteria. He might not know, but the coffee there is very tasty. For that taste, one can even die. The protagonist thought, she really is a very interesting person. He smiled and answered, okay. Hiroto imagined how near the academic building he stood next to Morano, and she suggested having fun. They shook hands and the system window showed his characteristics. The protagonist froze, holding Morano's hand. She asked, Hiroto? As he thought, agility affects perception. Things are bad. The protagonist froze and looked at the system window. Now 10 such nights are approaching them. After a while, Morano was sitting inside a large stone and asking, is everything really okay? Hiroto was moving the stone and looking at her. She said there were 10 of these. The protagonist replied, he knew what he was doing. She didn't have to worry. It seemed like these hadn't noticed them yet. She couldn't handle such an opponent. Hiroto was moving the stone and saying, let him sit there for now. Morano replied, okay. The protagonist asked him to wait for him. Morano asked Hiroto to be careful. As soon as he moved the stone, a dark shadow of a demon fell on him. Hiroto turned around and thought, this is bad. He doesn't think he can defeat all of these. The demon rushed towards him and swung his sword. The protagonist thought, wow, that's fast. There are too many of these. He wiped his nose with his hand and wondered if he could handle so many at once. The demons went towards him and swung their weapons again. Hiroto thought, it was simply impossible. He dodged the blow, and suddenly his body was pierced by a sword. Blood poured out of the protagonist's mouth and he screamed, horror! His body was pierced several times by demon swords and his arms were cut off. Pairs of bright eyes shone in the darkness. Hiroto grabbed his chest and screamed in pain. He screamed, horror, horror. He had been through so much, but to such a place. The protagonist's body continued to be tortured and he fell. Blood flowed from his body in a fast stream, and he spoke, he still did not. Images began to float in Hiroto's eyes. The demons looked at the protagonist's body and said, why, where did a human come from at their festival? Suddenly, the system window reported that the demon lord hunt will end in 0 hours, 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Waiting for confirmation from event participants. If the player dies outside the created room, the connection will be terminated according to the rules. This reported that a match was found. The sealed demon dragon, this is Vritra. Transferred to the realm of Vritra. After a while, Hiroto opened his eyes in surprise. He grabbed his chest and looked around. The protagonist looked forward in surprise and froze. The monster in front of him stepped on the ground with its clawed paw and waved its tail. Hiroto asked in surprise, "What is this?" The huge dragon was destroying buildings with its paws and was looking at the protagonist carefully. The system window reported that training for the Demon Lord hunting event was starting. The opponent is the sealed demon dragon Vritra. It opened its big mouth and released a stream of fire. Hiroto looked at it and frowned. The monster raised its head up, and then flew up and released a large stream of energy towards the protagonist. The system window reported that its health level dropped to 0. After a while, everything around was charred and the protagonist was lying under the textures. He raised his head up and saw the system window about training information. This raised the question, how did Vritra's breath baptism go? No need to worry, it's a one-time procedure. In addition, it is impossible to die during training, because students are protected by higher beings. Even if he dies in battle, he will be returned to the starting point. The condition for acquiring the skill is to defeat Vritra. The system window reported that after 3600 seconds, the system will count it as a draw. In this case, a new level and skills will not be acquired. Defeat will be counted when the player dies. For safety purposes, a safe zone with a radius of 10 meters has been created. It is recommended to rest in this zone for the sake of mental health. Hiroto lay on the ground and looked at all these system windows. A weapon began to form next to him. The system window reported that with this weapon, his chances of winning are no longer 0. This blade has special skills. The blade can cut anything. However, Vritra is an exception. The blade hit the ground and the system window said that he should use his time wisely. Hiroto looked towards it and said, "The chances are no longer 0. His opponent, is it the monster that caused the disaster?" He sat in the dome and looked forward. The protagonist said, "Besides this sword, it can cut through anything. However, dragon scales are an exception." Hiroto looked at his reflection on the tip of the sword and said he feels that this will not end well. He froze and thought, an immortal body? A blade that can cut through everything? The protagonist put his hand to his face and thought, if what the system said was really true, then with a good plan he can defeat it. A large monster flew towards the protagonist. However, can he really do it? Hiroto thought maybe he should just do nothing and stay in the safe zone, and then just go back. He remembered how many swords pierced his body and thought, to this hell? Hiroto slapped himself in the face and thought, what a stupid thought. He doesn't understand what kind of app this is. But thanks to it, he was able to level up and get a lot of skills. After all, he wanted to become stronger. The protagonist looked at the blade and grabbed it by the handle. He wants power. And this is the key. Hiroto looked towards the huge dragon and thrust the blade forward. This is the key to his power. He walked forward and pushed off the ground and swung the sword. The dragon headed towards him and stretched out its paw. The protagonist climbed onto its paw and rushed to run. He pushed off the body of this one and jumped high into the air to the large sphere above this one's head. The dragon raised its head and opened its mouth wide and slammed it shut. Hiroto got inside and pressed his tongue. He began to breathe heavily and thought that this was great. Everything was going as it should. An immortal body. A blade that could cut anything, but it couldn't cut the scales of a dragon. Only one answer was forced. The protagonist had to attack from the inside. After a while, a blade was floating in the monster's digestive juice. Hiroto dove in and screamed loudly. His body was eaten away to the bone, and then immediately restored. Very strong gastric juice. The pain was simply unbearable. The protagonist screamed. His body was not moving. No, he couldn't move. His body was constantly melting and restoring itself. There was no end to this torment. He couldn't even open his eyes. He thought he would die. It was in terrible pain. Hiroto moved forward along this one, curling up into a ball. Only a few minutes had passed. But it felt like years had passed. The protagonist swam on the water and thought, faster, anyway. He was running out of time. But why? Then and now. Why does he always choose the difficult path? Probably because he craves strength. Hiroto imagined himself and wondered what he wanted to say. He imagined Yuzuki turning around and thought, Yuzuki, did he just want to be on par with her? No. He wanted her not to think that he was weak. The protagonist imagined that he and Yuzuki were looking into each other's eyes and thought, that's why. He headed towards the blade and grabbed the hilt of this thought. That's why he can't stop halfway. Hiroto turned over and slashed the blade at the monster's stomach. He kept poking it at the stomach tissue, but he couldn't cut it. Suddenly, this one's belly was ripped open and a loud scream was heard. The monster's blood splashed in all directions. The protagonist looked out from there, and the dragon quickly fell to the ground. Hiroto got out and put the blade on the ground and coughed. His body began to heal, and the system window reported that the limit of hunter skill development was reached. Skill acquired, bonus for killing the divine dragon received. The system window reported, the demon lord of gluttony. The divine dragon was defeated. Vitra was absorbed using the demon lord application. Strength increased by 10. The protagonist's body was covered with an energy flow. The system window reported, moving, returning to the original place. Hiroto imagined an album in which there was a photo of little Yuzuki, and thought that heroes in games are always brave and strong. Below was his photo, and he thought that on the next mission he would also be a hero. And she, Yuzuki, a white mage. Yuzuki looked at him in surprise and asked, "Why does she always have to play as a healer?" Hiroto turned away and replied that fighting is a man's business. Besides, he doesn't want her to get hurt. Even in a game. Now that he thinks about it, Hiroto said something like this. Yuzuki was embarrassed and the protagonist responded, and he wasn't just talking about games. He turned around and said, if there was danger, he would protect her. When he said that, she was happy. Then time passed. Yuzuki was walking down the street and black shadows were reaching out to her. She remembered the cries, let him save them, protect them. She is the protector of humanity. The role that Yuzuki was given was just like the protagonist in the game. She lowered her head down and said, it would be better if she were a white mage. Dark shadows appeared on her legs again and she heard, protagonist, they are safe with her, let him not leave. She must protect them. Yuzuki said sadly, the lives of so many people depend on her. At that moment, the bodies of the students were scattered in the dungeon. Yuzuki was breathing heavily and leaning on her sword, thinking that at the cost of all the boys' lives, she was able to defeat one. Suddenly, all 10 demons appeared behind her, and she asked, isn't she a hero? Yuzuki raised her head, exhaled and said with a hysterical smile, she can't win. This is the end. She looked at the army of demons and thought that she couldn't get out. She was alone. Yuzuki grabbed the hilt of her sword and thought that she had to make a decision. She clenched her jaw and thought that she had to do something. Suddenly, she looked down in surprise and exhaled and thought, what? Why are her hands shaking? That's how it is. Now she. Yuzuki stood in front of the army of monsters and realized that she was afraid. In the past, no matter how difficult the battle was, she was never afraid. She was always the semblance of a hero that others wanted to see. Always. Currently, she dropped her sword and fell to the floor. But in reality, the demons rushed towards her and Yuzuki screamed, someone, let him save her. Tears came to her eyes. And she clenched her jaw. She looked at this one and said, Hiroto. The demon swung his sword, when suddenly this one's body was pierced by a foot. This one fell and an energy trail stretched upward. Yuzuki looked at it in surprise. She remembered the image of little Hiroto and his words, when she was scared, let her call out and he would save her. The protagonist clenched his fist and hit the monster. Yuzuki stood up and thought, where did he get so much strength from? How can he be so strong even with F-rank abilities? Why? Hiroto kicked the demons, and the question did not leave Yuzuki's head. The protagonist punched the monster, and its armor was destroyed. However, in an instant, all doubts were dispelled. Yuzuki sighed and said, if he is so strong, why didn't he come earlier? Hiroto. The protagonist smiled slightly and said sorry. He hurried as much as he could. Hiroto asked her to be patient, it will be over soon. He took out his blade and activated the skill Fierce Divine Dragon. The demon stood in front of him, clutching the hilt of his sword. The protagonist grabbed the tip of it and held out his blade. He cut the head off the demon's shoulders with one swing. It felt like he was cutting a cake. These ones can't do anything against him. Hiroto swung and cut the demon's body again. He got rid of these one by one. The protagonist looked around and thought that he had dealt with so many enemies in a few seconds. What kind of program is this? At that moment, Yuzuki stood up and said, Hiroto, this is the end. For both enemies and allies. The protagonist looked at her in surprise and said that all the adventurers on this floor have died, that can't be changed. What about the people on the upper floors? Yuzuki showed a crystal and said that these are communication crystals. A useful artifact for communication in the dungeons. No one is answering then. Hiroto screamed, no. He said there must be another survivor. They were in the same group, Her name is Morano. After a while, the protagonist returned to the place and moved the stone aside, looking inside in surprise. He told her to wait for him, but she was nowhere to be found. Her body was also nowhere to be seen. He put his hand on her neck and said, could it be that she was kidnapped? He heard that goblins usually kidnap women. She was nowhere to be found. They must find her, otherwise it might be too late. Hiroto asked, will she help Yuzuki? She looked at him carefully and frowned, of course. If there is a survivor, they must save her. It would be best to stick together. Yuzuki put her hand on the protagonist's shoulder and said that he can rely on her. He smiled and looked at her. After a while, Hiroto froze in fear. Yuzuki put her hands to her lips in fear. In front of them, everything was covered in blood and there were demons in cloaks. Swords were stuck into Morano's body, giving him no chance to survive. If he saves something, he will definitely lose something. Hiroto remembered the image of Akira and wondered why it always had to be good people. He remembered the words of a smiling Morano, who offered to treat him to coffee when they returned. So many people die in the dungeons. Yuzuki looked at Morano's body in fear. The protagonist squeezed the handle of the blade in his jaws. He remembered Morano's smiling face and screamed loudly. Yuzuki stretched her hand forward and screamed, Hiroto! But there was no stopping him. He rushed forward and began to cut the bodies of the demons. One by one, their body parts were torn off. The loud scream of the protagonist echoed in the dungeon. He squeezed the handle of the blade and stabbed it into the monster's head, splitting the helmet. The same thing happened when he first went into the dungeon. In the end, 271 people died in the monster attack, and 2 survived. He would definitely remember them all. Yuzuki stretched out her hand and cried. That's right, they were the only ones who survived. The protagonist cried and swung his weapon. They would definitely return home. Then the academy was closed. After a while, Hiroto and Yuzuki were sitting in chairs in front of a man. If they wished, they could transfer to any other school and continue their education. Or they could officially start working as hunters. In other words, what would happen next was entirely up to them. The protagonist and Yuzuki handed the sheets of paper to the man, and then stood up and bowed. After a while, they were walking along the green lawn of the park. Yuzuki turned around and asked, well, what will Hiroto do? He put his hands in his pockets and walked forward and answered, I have no idea. Because of the dungeons, he had already suffered so much. Yuzuki followed behind him. Hiroto imagined images of monsters and mocking students. He thought, and not only from monsters, there were also people whose hearts were filled with evil. It was truly terrible. But he did not want to give up everything. The protagonist remembered the images of Morano and Akira and said because there were people who cannot be forgotten. As long as he lives, he will never forget about them and how they lived. Yuzuki said sadly, that's how. She stopped and said, let him listen, Hiroto. He turned around and Yuzuki asked him to tell her how he became so strong. She wants to become as strong as he is. She does not want to be afraid anymore. Yuzuki remembered how he grabbed her in the dungeon and asked, or maybe it was something that he cannot trust even her? It is not that Hiroto does not trust Yuzuki. This mysterious power, what should he say? Until he finds out everything about this app, it's best to keep it a secret for now. If the Hunters Guild finds out about it, who knows what they'll do to him? Even if he's become stronger, there are people in the world who are much stronger. The guild leaders, the world-class hunters. Hiroto raised his eyebrows and said, Yuzuki, he can't say yet. Until he can protect the people close to him. Yuzuki looked at him and replied, she had already told him. No matter what happens, he can rely on her. Hiroto asked for forgiveness, but for now he doesn't want to team up with anyone. Yuzuki lowered her head, and the protagonist narrowed his eyes and clenched his fists. He said that maybe he could explain everything to her later. For now, he shouldn't tell anyone about him. Let them forget about him. Yuzuki remained silent, and the wind slightly blew her hair. Her shoulder twitched and she replied, okay, she will forget everything related to him, Hiroto. Yuzuki smiled and said, however, this time, let him try to come back faster. Well, she said it again. The protagonist slightly tilted his head to the side and said, as he had already said, he would try to come back faster. Yuzuki smiled and put her hand to her chin. They walked along the path together. After a while, when the sunset was replaced by the night sky, Hiroto was sleeping in his room. The screen of his phone turned on and a message appeared that an unexpected task had appeared. Mission, 0 hours, 0 minutes and 0 seconds left until the start of the Demon Lord's trial. Match found, trial is starting. At this moment, the protagonist was teleported to some ancient ruins. He looked at the system windows, where it was written that his opponent was the Emperor of Purgatory. The compatibility of the user and Lucifer is being checked. The victory conditions are the death of one of the opponents. Hiroto read it and said the victory conditions are the death of one of the opponents. Morano stood in front of him and held a spear in her hands. The system window said that the test will begin when both sides agree to the test conditions. Hiroto asked, "What?" Morano looked at him and asked, "Hiroto?" The protagonist said, puzzled, "Morano?" He squeezed the hilt of the sword and the system window said that they can kill each other as much as they want. 7 days ago, the guys saw Morano's body and Yuzuki hugged Hiroto's body from behind. Morano's body was lying in a huge pool of her own blood. Swords were stuck into it, and a phone with a Gainmon was lying there. Currently, Morano stood in the center of the ruins and asked, "Where is she?" A system window appeared in front of her, which said that the skill Rising Star, Lord of Purgatory, Lucifer was acquired. Connection established. Morano asked in surprise, "Lucifer? Morning Star, Demon Lord Lucifer?" She looked down in confusion and saw a system window in front of her, which said that the Demon Lord hunt had begun. Let them have fun and kill each other. Morano asked, "Kill?" She looked ahead in surprise, where the protagonist appeared. He asked, "Morano?" She looked at him and asked, "Is it him, Hiroto?" Morano hit her hand on her head and said, "That's right, she died from those nights." But what is this? Such a strange feeling, hunting the Demon Lord and some kind of murder. The protagonist asked in surprise, "Morano, does she happen to know about the Demon Lord's app?" She asked, "Is he talking about that strange app?" Hiroto frowned and asked, "Did she have this too?" Morano screamed, "What is this? If she knows, let her tell you. What's going on there?" The protagonist looked at her and answered this. After a while, someone in the lab asked, "What's with the coefficients? Maybe the men are more popular than her." The character icons appeared on the light board. The man looked at the screen and said thoughtfully, "They are just talking. Somehow everything is too calm. He thinks they should intervene. If it does not help, they will get into their heads." Morano looked around and said, "It is hard to believe." The protagonist said, he himself did not believe it, but thanks to the app, he became incredibly strong. He remembered how he struck the guys and said, "But he is so." Morano interrupted him and asked, "However, what does hunting the Demon Lord mean? Why do they have to fight at all? And a bonus." Hiroto looked down and remembered the battle with the dragon. He said, in his experience, at first, he does not die when defeated. Is it different for her? Morano squeezed the handle of the spear and said, "But kill the other." The protagonist put his hand to his chin and thought, he and Morano have different starting skills, and the resurrection conditions are also different. Are their apps different? Hiroto shook his head and thought that it was useless to think about it now. He said that last time, a draw was counted after 1 hour. He suggests waiting until the time is up and the system window reported that there is no time limit. The test will only end when one of the participants dies. Notification: there is no draw rule in this test. Morano frowned and said this. Suddenly, chunks of flesh came off their ears and blood spurted out. They put their hands to their ears and screamed. Warning: waiting time has expired, punishment has been assigned. Hiroto looked at his hand and asked, "Is this a punishment? Is there no other choice?" Suddenly, everything around him began to float and the protagonist asked, "What is this? What is happening?" Morano looked ahead and saw only big eyes. She said, "Right, there is no other choice." She grabbed the handle of the spear and said that she will kill him. Morano lowered her head to the side and said, "There is no other choice, she will kill him." The protagonist screamed, "Why him?" He narrowed his eyes and said, "No, she is right." He walked forward and clenched his fists and said, "There is no other choice. He will kill her." After a while, they stood opposite each other. Morano pushed off the ground and rushed forward, swinging her spear. The system window reported that this is the skill Rising Star. The tip of it was directed towards Hiroto, but he jumped and the spear rushed into the ground, scattering stones in different directions. He wondered if she had hit him with this, and there would be injuries. Morano rushed at him again, and the protagonist put a block in front of himself. But he will not give her such luxury. Hiroto dodged all the attacks and thought, honed movement, excellent possession of the spear. He admits, her training was not in vain. Hiroto grabbed the spear handle and thought, and yet they were on different levels in it. He bent down to her and asked her to surrender, Morano. She let go of the spear and swung her fist. Weak, too weak, just like her. At the same time, just like Yuzuki. The protagonist remembered how he protected Yuzuki and looked forward in surprise. He dodged and thought, what's going on? Why are he and Morano fighting to the death? Energy enveloped Hiroto's body and he covered his face with his hand. He thought, he can't let himself be absorbed. At that moment, a blow from Morano flew at his cheek. The protagonist covered his face with his hands and thought, great, he came to his senses. He opened his face and discontentedly ordered Morano to listen to him. The protagonist pushed off the ground and swung his leg and shouted, let her forgive him, Morano. He hit her in the stomach and she flew forward, hitting her back on the ground several times. After a while, she raised herself up and hugged her waist and began to breathe heavily. She said, let him forgive her. The system window asked to kill each other to their heart's content. Hiroto waved his hand and said, he refuses. He punched the system window and screamed, he would never agree to something like this. Morano screamed, she also refuses. The system window evaporated, and another reported that the title of the rebel was received. Bonus for receiving the title, the skill of the fugitive, and the skill of the target. The protagonist looked at this in surprise and asked, rebel? He said, rebel? Against whom? Hiroto said, no, it does not matter now. The main problem is the skills. He looked ahead and asked, Morano, did they also give her the title and skills? Morano answered, the title of the rebel, the skills of the target, and the fugitive. What should be done about this? Hiroto thought about it, so she has everything the same. Well, if so. He narrowed his eyes and said, Morano? She looked at him in surprise and he asked, how about committing suicide? Morano asked in fear, suicide? The protagonist answered that he did not want to kill her. Morano spread her arms in different directions and screamed, she didn't want to kill him either. Hiroto replied they figured that out, but sitting quietly and waiting for his death was also not an option. This was just his guess, perhaps it didn't make sense at all. That's why it was very much like suicide. Morano replied, okay, she didn't fully understand the meaning of this title, but she was a target and a fugitive. Hiroto reached for her spear and she said, these skills are given to those who refuse to die in a duel. So, most likely, this is needed in order to die in a different way, right? Hiroto replied, from the very beginning, this whole app worked like some kind of game. Previously, when he participated in the hunt for the Demon Lord, he was given a hint to a solution that a normal person would never have thought of. This duel is also part of the game. As they talked, more and more windows with notifications popped up, someone was imposing his will on them, and put it all together. Hiroto raised the spears and looked away. He said that there was someone behind this app and they were betting on them. But he wasn't afraid of them. Morano asked, so? This title and skills were given to them for a reason. Perhaps there was some kind of hint hidden in the name. The protagonist answered, in other words, it was a message. He handed the spear to Morano and said that they could escape. Morano asked again, could they escape? Hiroto answered, he had no evidence, and frankly, he wasn't sure himself. He turned around and looked at the door and said, but as a rule. The doors began to open and the protagonist grinned and said, his assumptions were correct. The doors opened slightly and sunlight entered. The guys went inside and Hiroto said, who knows what awaits them ahead. The system window reported, a countdown, 782 seconds. He said they don't have much time, they need to hurry. The boys rushed forward, when suddenly cuts appeared on their cheeks and blood spurted out. The system window reported that the punishment was activated. They asked them to be more careful in the future. After a while, the protagonist was breathing heavily. The scoreboard showed that there were 512 seconds left. There were traces of blood everywhere, and there were many lacerations on his body. Hiroto was moving forward and breathing heavily. This appeared right after he was given the title of the rebel. The inscription, interference, appeared on the system window. The level of interference in the world. Interesting, but now is not the time for this. Their health points are steadily falling. The system window reported that the punishment was activated. Large wounds appeared on the bodies of the protagonist and Morano. She spoke, her health status decreased by 10%. And how is he? Hiroto replied that he would definitely not call his condition good. The countdown indicated that there were 501 seconds left. He thought the wounds were deep, but he had already lost a lot of blood. Morano asked, let him listen, maybe they would turn back? According to these messages, they would not be punished if they turned back. Hiroto asked, well, they would turn back, but then what? They were expecting a massacre. Morano lowered her head and answered, he was right, but at this rate they both were. Suddenly the protagonist screamed, no, he saw the light. Morano said they could break through. The guys, breathing heavily, walked forward towards the bright glow. After a while, bloody traces remained on the floor. Hiroto opened the system window and at that moment Morano fell to the floor. He lifted her body and shouted, Morano, there is still a little left, she must not give up. They will not die in such a place. Hiroto wrapped his arm around Morano's neck and they walked forward. The system window reported that the punishment was activated. The health status was decreasing at an increasing speed. At that moment, they broke through to the glow and the protagonist thought that he did not understand what this application was for. Did not understand why the people behind this application were playing with him. But he would never die there. The system window reported that the punishment was activated. Blood splattered in different directions and the health dropped to 0. Suddenly, 1 unit of health appeared and the protagonist screamed loudly. He went forward and went to the crystals. The system window reported that both participants were able to leave the battle arena alive. The players received the title of Rebel against the world. Hiroto hugged Morano and read the inscription. At that moment, the old man sat in his throne and looked at the statistics. He asked, 421 couples ran away? It had been a long time since that happened. The servant approached him and asked if he was sure that this was the right decision. The old man asked, is he talking about that healing? He does not see any problems. They only healed their wounds received in the arena. If both sides don't want to fight, then they don't lose their health. It's logical to restore them. The assistant asked if their interference was against the rules. The old man knocked on the chair and replied that they would start by saying that they only started fighting because of their interference. It would be unfair for them to ignore this oversight. After all, it would be against the goal of the game. The old men would clearly be unhappy. After a while, the protagonist was sitting in his room, looking at his phone screen. Morano was taking a shower at that moment, and their things were hanging on the hanger. Hiroto wondered what kind of app this actually was. Morano came out of the shower in a robe, and he asked how her wounds were. Morano sat down on the sofa and replied that she had examined herself from head to toe. Everything was the same as his, not a single scratch. The protagonist looked at her and said nothing. Rebels, rebelling against the world. The level of interference in the world is 66%. Hiroto thought, all this is somehow connected to each other. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Morano looked at him and asked to listen, Hiroto. He looked at her carefully. This is what she thinks. If there is someone behind this app, is he really that bad? The protagonist asked if she thought he was a good guy. Morano lowered her head and replied that they were able to escape, even though they were on the verge of death. Doesn't that mean they were initially given a chance to avoid the fight? And he, Hiroto, seemed to be ready for these tricks. She once read about something like this in a manga. There was an organization that staged a massacre between a bunch of people with a dubious past. But they believed in their humanity until the very end. And as long as the players did not break the rules, they had a chance to survive. It was all conceived in such a way that in the end only the organizers themselves should die. In the manga, everyone spat on the rules and behaved as they wanted, which only increased the number of deaths, and the ending even makes you want to cry. Hiroto looked at her and said nothing. He looked down at his phone, and then turned it on and said, Morano, he thinks this app doesn't belong to the category of cute stories. At that moment, when the stars rose in the sky, Yuzuki was lying on the bed and thinking, this window, after all, looks very similar to the game menu. But why can only S-rank people see this? The system window with a gold frame was hovering above her. Suddenly, she looked at it in surprise. The system window offered an urgent stock request for owners of a special version of the application. The goal is to kill 1 or 2 specified. The first is Ijime Hiroto, and the second is Ito Morano. Reward: unlocking the store, internal currency, 1 kill is 5,000 credits. Description: in 10 days their exact location will be indicated, after which she will be given 24 hours to kill. They recommend stalking your victims until then if she already knows their location. Yuzuki jumped up and asked in fear, what is this? The system window highlighted the names. It asked if it wanted to accept the quest. The answers could only be yes or no. At that moment, the protagonist said, Morano, he thinks this app is not one of those cute stories. Morano asked, what does he have? Suddenly, a system window popped up in front of her, indicating that a penalty had been assigned. There were 10 days left until the meeting with the Death Stalker. Morano looked at it and asked, Death Stalker? Hiroto replied, even though they managed to avoid the massacre, in the end, they were still in the palm of their hand. He imagined that they were sitting on a large palm. That's what he was trying to say. After a while, the protagonist was standing in the park talking on the phone. He asked, what the hell is this urgent stalker quest anyway? Yuzuki was standing near the window in the gym and answering, why him and Morano, why would she kill them? Hiroto replied, he himself doesn't know. Yuzuki remained silent in response. She said that's how? The protagonist suggested repeating what they knew. The quest would start in 10 days, their location would be revealed at that time, and they would have to survive for 24 hours. And since she had abandoned the quest, it was transferred to another app user, right? Yuzuki replied yes, it was as he said. Hiroto wanted to clarify one more thing. He looked to the side, presented the system windows, and asked, S-rank hunters can see the status window, and it was like the game's screen? Yuzuki replied yes, she can see it, it was as written in the hunter book. The protagonist wondered if her status window and theirs with Morano were the Demon Lord app. So they're seeing a single app? He said that, talking about the quest being passed on to someone. Any idea who it could be? Yuzuki wiped her face with a towel and asked to listen, Hiroto. He's actually involved in all of this somehow, right? Hiroto exhaled and said that it was better for her not to know about it for now. Yuzuki replied, lately she was starting to understand less and less about what was going on around her. She exhaled and said, oh well? About the new owner of the quest, she assumed that it was an S rank like her. Not many people know about this, but there is a group of people consisting exclusively of S rank hunters. They call themselves Demon Lord Hunters. She is still a student, so she doesn't fit in with them. She once had a chance to talk to one of them. He said that they chose such a name because their abilities will be stronger than any Demon Lord in video games. The protagonist's eyes widened in surprise and he thought, Demon Lord Hunters? The Demon Lord app, and now hunters. No matter how you look at it, it wasn't just a coincidence. Why was this world filled with monsters? Where did these game system windows come from? What was the Demon Lord app, and who were the hunters? And that was probably not all. Hiroto clenched his fist and thought that now he had no doubt, all of these things were interconnected. Yuzuki called out to him and asked why he had gone silent. The protagonist asked for forgiveness and thought, and finally the S ranks, who were somehow involved in this. Quests that were passed exclusively between them, killing other hunters, hunting them down. The quest taker was called a Death Stalker, so one thing was clear. Hiroto thought that now he couldn't reveal his identity or his abilities to anyone, especially if an S rank was hunting him. Yuzuki asked, and also, why did the dead Morano suddenly resurrect? She frowned and asked, he won't explain this to her either, right? The protagonist said to forgive. Yuzuki looked away and replied that she understood. Anyway, he wants to get the ID of the hunter who was missing in the dungeon, right? And they need to find someone similar in age and parameters to Morano. Hiroto asked if they have a chance. Yuzuki replied that she doesn't want to talk about it much, but in the dungeons, the rules and laws are up to the hunters themselves. In other words, there are practically no rules. The rulers will turn a blind eye to any dirt as long as it doesn't cause harm to the outside world. That's why usually in the dungeons, the ID of the hunters is found on their corpses. And it seems that secretly people exchange it for treasures from the dungeons. Yuzuki walked ahead in the gym and asked to listen. She asked, he is near Machida Station now, right? Hiroto replied, yeah, since he doesn't know exactly when he'll be attacked, he'll strengthen his position. Yuzuki told him to send her the address to hand over the ID later. She put her hand on the window and said goodbye. Yuzuki sighed and lowered the phone, thinking, he still hasn't told her anything. Maybe he thinks that if he knows the truth, she'll be in danger herself. She looked out the window and asked with sadness in her eyes, can't you rely on her at all, huh? After a while, Morano and Hiroto were walking through the store. Morano said they'd be lucky if they could rent 2 adjacent apartments. They can't live in a hotel forever. But is he sure everything's okay? He spent so much money. On the day they returned, he gave her his phone and told her to order whatever she needed. Morano adjusted her cap and thought sheepishly that she had to buy her underwear through his phone. She borrowed a shirt from Hiroto. The protagonist told her not to worry. For that incident in the dungeon, he was paid a considerable amount of compensation. Morano replied, that's how, but still. She can't sit on his neck forever, Hiroto. They are hunters after all. The protagonist smiled and closed his eyes and replied, Tomorrow they will go to the dungeon, and she will be able to earn some money too. Her skill, if used correctly, is simply deadly. Hiroto looked at her and thought, so there is no need to worry about capturing the dungeon. He thoughtfully asked, Morano? She was standing near a toy store and carefully examining one of the toys. Hiroto wondered, what is this? He said to go, Morano? She answered, yeah. The protagonist walked forward and slightly turned around and said, so, if they go through this shopping center then. He turned around and looked at Morano, who was touching the toys. Hiroto looked around and saw that there was an image of this rabbit everywhere. He wondered, are there other stores like this too? Do people like this toy? Morano picked it up and said admiringly, cute. Hiroto stood behind her and looked at her with a puzzled expression. He asked, does she want it? Morano remained silent and hugged the rabbit to herself. At first, the protagonist tried to figure out if she was a bad person, then she seemed interesting to him. And now? Morano hugged the toy to herself and thanked Hiroto. The protagonist smiled at her and thought, it seems like she is quite strange, huh? They approached the map and he said, whatever? If they go like this, they will quickly reach the destination. Suddenly, the phone vibrated in his pocket. Hiroto wondered, another call from Yuzuki? He looked at it in surprise, and it said that the Demon Lord's app sent one notification. A message from the administration says that he received a gift. The sender is Alphagard, the Demon Lord of another world. Recipient Ijima Hiroto, sender Alphagard, a demon lord from another world, recipient Hiroto. The gift is a great sword called Genocide. Assess rarity, the more human blood the sword drinks, the bigger it will become. Weapon information, the sword itself is weak, but with every new drop of human blood it drinks, it will become stronger until it reaches the power to kill a god himself. He received an item, the storage function is unlocked. Now he can open it at any time and put in or take out items. Hiroto thinks he understands what a storage is. However, a sword that drinks human blood. Morano walks next to him and gets his attention by calling his name and asking what's wrong with him. Hiroto looks away with a displeased look and says that it's just that this app has really bad taste. At the same time, a dungeon controlled by hunters from Artemis Academy. A guy with a big shield blocks a quick sword strike from a skeleton. The girl with the sword takes advantage of the moment, while the monster is distracted and is about to attack from behind. With a blow of her sword, she knocks the helmet off the skeleton's head. They notice that it is undead and the priest immediately uses the Holy Radiance skill. The guy with the shield blocks the attacks of this monster, and the priest says that he can't do it, because these monsters are not that weak. The darkness in his soul is too huge, he can't cleanse it. The girl standing next to him starts using magic, and says that the weak point of the undead is fire. She uses the fire pillar spell and hits the skeleton. They see what is left of this monster and ask, did they succeed? The swordswoman and the guy with the shield say that it took them as many as 5 people to deal with one monster. And all 5 of them were B rank. The girl with the staff asks if he could handle this monster one-on-one. The guy turns to her and says that now is not the time for jokes. The swordswoman says that there are probably many more of these monsters ahead. Will they be able to handle a crowd of them when they barely defeated one? They can be called a large guild and this is their first dungeon exploration mission. The girl asks if they should then go to a larger guild and ask them for more B-rank hunters. The guy standing next to them refuses and says that it is better to call a rank hunters right away. The swordwoman asks if they think there are that many rank hunters in the association. Even if they call them here, they will never agree. The guy with the shield laughs and says that she is right, their budget is too limited to hire such hunters. The swordwoman says that anyway, she wants to rest. Accidents in dungeons are not uncommon, and she does not want to get into one of those. Suddenly, they all start to feel a very strong pressure and notice loud sounds. They notice a huge monster watching them and ask if its armor is white instead of black. This monster is descending towards them very quickly and the girl with the staff, worried about this, thinks that this monster is very fast. B-rank hunters are veterans of their craft, they are much stronger than C-rank. They are also called first class. But seeing this white armor, each of them wanted to escape from the dungeon. The guy with the axe loudly says that they must retreat, they need an A-rank hunter. Although for this you need an S-rank hunter. The giant does not give them time to escape and with one very strong blow of his weapon kills this guy, leaving the mage and the priest alone. A man comes towards them, attracting their attention by laughing loudly and asking, so this monster can only be defeated by an S-rank? This man was very self-confident, he did not have a single piece of armor on, and did not even bring a weapon with him. The giant deals a very strong blow with a large axe. But the man stopped this attack with his hand. In other words, he lived by killing monsters with his bare hands. The man waved his hand and easily removed the monster's huge axe from himself. The priest and the mage look at this with admiration, and she says that he parried his blow with his hand. The man quickly ran to the monster, grabbed it with both hands, laughs loudly and says that he will now destroy this monster. With his very strong hands, he squeezes the armor and asks, "Is it really made of only bones?" He threw the body of the huge monster on the ground and calmly walked on. The mage looks at this and says that this monster killed 3 B-rank hunters with one blow. Maybe he did it by accident? The priest says that it is not so, it is just that this man is special. He may be B-rank, but his strength is already equal to S rank. When he first started, his strength was at the peak of a rank. Perhaps one day he will become the greatest hunter. A hunter who became S rank on his own, and not by the whim of nature. The man hears them and thinks that for the most part, what this guy says is true. But no matter how strong he is, even he couldn't defeat this monster in one blow. The store is a function that is only available to S rank. He touches his necklace with a smile and thinks that this thing cost him 15,000 credits. The system window says that these are necklaces of an immortal hero. Rarity level A, grants strength comparable to demonic as long as he does not have a weapon in his hands. Health points are increased by 10,000 points, strength by 25 points, defense by 100 points. Additional skill demonic melee art. A system window appears in front of him, saying that he has received an urgent quest for owners of the app version. The goal is to kill 1 or 2 specified users. The targets are Ijaim Hiroto and Ito Morano. The reward is to unlock the store, an internal currency of 5,000 credits per kill. The man looks at this and thinks, is the goal of this urgent quest to kill Hiroto? If he is not mistaken, then he is one of the survivors of the dungeon incident. A smile appears on his face and he thinks, 5,000 credits for killing a schoolboy? The reward is even too good, don't they think? Of course he accepts this quest. Right now, he has 20,000 credits, so he should see what he can buy. He is surprised when he notices something in the system window with the suggested items. The man looks at the weapons tab and wonders, someone bought a weapon with one of the best attributes, God's Slayers? An S rank who earned enough credits to buy an item capable of killing gods, is that even possible? His attention is drawn to a priest who asks if something is wrong with him. The man says that everything is fine and that they can ignore him. By the way, that was an S-rank monster, right? The priest says that he thinks so. The man says with a smile that then his legend will sound quite plausible. The B-rank hunters came across an S-rank monster, fell in battle, and only he, as the owner of A-rank strength, was able to defeat the monster and survive, sacrificing 5 comrades. Because of what he says, 2 hunters become very tense and look at him with fear. The man raises his head, covers the upper part of his face with his hand and says with a smile that he will be able to sell all their equipment and clothes profitably. He looks at them through his fingers and says that after all, they are first-class B-rank hunters. The priest says that he asks him not to joke like that. Even if he does, he will be caught during the inspection at the entrance to the city, won't he? Because something like this has happened before the government. He doesn't have time to finish because the man grabs his head and says that he has a storage skill that allows him to store all of his items in a small subspace. Has he ever wondered why most of the current S-rank hunters tell stories about how they miraculously survived in a dungeon after losing all of their comrades? On the streets, these stories are called heroic legends. But in reality, this is not true at all. They just killed everyone and took everything they had. Now it's his turn. He tried so hard to collect all of this money and equipment for him. The mage looks at what is happening with a very frightened look and can do nothing while the priest is killed in front of her eyes. The man turns to her and says loudly with a frightening look that it's time for him to earn money. He walked up to her and knocked the staff out of her hands with a wave of his hand. She tries to resist and calls for help while he holds her by her clothes, swings his fist and says that he is the god and the judge here. And killing women is the most fun. He laughs loudly and kills the girl. He remembers the names of Hiroto and Morano, and says with a joyful look that it's time for him to start his fun hunt. At the same time, Hiroto, along with Morano, along with an unknown girl, are looking at the building and say nothing. She adjusts her glasses and asks if she understands that they are looking for an apartment to live together, right? He agrees with a calm face and says that they need an apartment with 2 rooms. Morano leans towards him, and with a slightly worried look asks if maybe he should explain to her that this is a misunderstanding. Hiroto says that he planned to do so. The girl says that they have 60,000 yen in total, which makes 30,000 per room. This is not even close to the current market prices. They are a couple, so maybe it would be better for them to find an apartment with one bedroom? What she said surprised them both greatly. Hiroto, confused, says that even if it would be cheaper, he doesn't think so. Morano, with a face red from embarrassment, asks if they have to share a room. Someone comes up to them, surprised by what they heard, and asks if they are going to share a room. Morano turns around abruptly, and is very surprised when she notices Yuzuki standing behind them. She apologizes to Hiroto and says that she overheard them. From a safety standpoint, she understands why they have to live together. But doesn't he think that sleeping in the same room is a bit much? She hands him a paper bag and Hiroto says that they didn't plan on sleeping in the same room. Yuzuki says that this is what he asked for. And she also took the liberty of buying necessities for her. Morano starts crying with joy and says that she is very grateful to her for that. Yuzuki is about to leave, but stops, calls Hiroto and says that she has come to terms with the fact that he is hiding something from her, but she cannot come to terms with the lie. She turns around with an angry look and says that if he is going to use her as the courier's love interest, then she will not remain silent. That is all she has. The realtor looks at them with a surprised look and thinks that she is as if she is on a battlefield. Yuzuki leaves, and Hiroto tries to stop her and says that she should wait a little. She does not stop, continues walking and sighs with displeasure. Some time later in a large building, Hiroto is standing with Morano at the terminal, while many people are walking around them. He looks at the screen and says that it seems like the misunderstanding was resolved. But still, why are you so angry? Morano stands nearby with a worried look and wonders if she was really angry because of the lie. She looks down and thinks that maybe she and Yuzuki feel the same way. Hiroto looks at her and asks what's wrong with her. Morano blushes deeply in surprise and says that it's nothing, he can ignore it. She calms down and Hiroto thinks that their main priority now is to not be seen by the Death Stalker. In other words, they must avoid all S-rank users. No matter where they hide, their location will be revealed when the timer reaches 0. This means that all they can do is train hard in hopes of fighting back against the Stalker. He is an F rank, so he has already reached the maximum level. But by killing new types of monsters, he will become stronger due to the gluttony skill. Morano, on the other hand, does not have this skill. But she has not reached the maximum level. Besides, her fighting skills are well honed. The only reason she failed to injure the Minotaur is because she lacks the punching power. She masterfully compensates for her lack of talent with her honed skills. If you add that skill to all of this, with all of this she not only compensates for her weaknesses, but can also fight monsters above her rank. So her level will grow by leaps and bounds. Morano says that there is no dungeon in the world where you can quickly level up. Hiroto says that she is right. If they want to quickly level her up, they should focus on dungeons with high-level monsters. However, for safety reasons, only F-rank dungeons are available to beginners like them. The system window that appeared on the screen says that the dungeon is inhabited by low-level goblins, but recently there has been a critical increase in their number. With a mage with large-scale attack spells in the team, even F-rank beginners can pass the dungeon. Hiroto looks at this and says that these are not the best conditions. Morano asks, have they really not managed to change the dungeon's rank yet? He says that it usually takes a month to change the dungeon's rank from FT. They should get back to business. They have two options. The first is to secretly infiltrate one of the dungeons controlled by the Hunter Association of a higher rank. It's illegal, so he would have rejected that option. He points to the screen and says that this is their second option. She looks at it in surprise and is about to say something about it. At that moment, a man who accepted the quest to kill them enters the room. Hiroto points to the screen and says that this is the best option. The screen says that the dungeon is Azuba Gate C1. The main enemies are beastmen. The difficulty of the dungeon is B. The restriction is that only F-rank hunters can enter. Advice: there are a lot of minerals in this dungeon, so they should take a porter with them. Morano, looking surprised, says that they don't have a porter. Hiroto says that this dungeon has already been cleared and no one really goes there. Now it's more like a local mine of magic, or where only porters and their guards go. Morano says that besides, all the treasures that were originally in the dungeon have already been taken out. But if they want to raise the level, that means they have to take on the role of guards, right? No choice, they have to hire a porter? Hiroto says with a smile that there is no rule that prohibits a porter from protecting himself. The man who entered this building thinks that if he doesn't constantly explore new dungeons, he won't be able to raise his rank. He walks forward and thinks that he has no choice, he has to take new assignments. Hiroto and Morano leave and the man doesn't notice them because someone calls him Tamawa. He turns around and the guy who called him says that he's incredible for being able to clear an entire dungeon by himself. He was even given Hunter rank A as a special exception. Tamawa says with a smile that he understands everything. So, does that mean he needs to fill out some paperwork for this? The guy says that the vice president of this association will contact him very soon and discuss all the details. The fact that he personally wants to talk to him means that he is recognized as a national treasure. After all, a rank is no joke. Of course, they will treat him differently now. If he received their S rank certificate, they would even organize a press conference and officially announce it to everyone. Tamawa thinks with a smile that it means that he is now a national treasure of a rank. After all, he has long reached this rank, so why not get official confirmation? Sometime later, at the entrance to the dungeon, where Hiroto and Morano came, their attention is drawn to the fact that someone loudly asks what he did. Someone pushed the guy and he fell to the ground because of it. The bald guy asks with a displeased look, since they still had to hire porters, then why not girls? Did he at least write in the request that girls are needed? The guy apologizes and says that if he had written something like that, no one would have come to them at all. The bald guy approaches Morano and says that he is a good boy, because at least he was able to bring one nice girl. He angers her by asking with a smile, so she is a hunter Irunga? Such insects are completely useless in battle, but at least they will have something to look at. He points his finger at Hiroto and says that he is completely useless, so he will only get half the reward. The guy stood up, grabbed his hand and said that he should not go too far. If he continues to escalate like this, they will not find any more porters. The bald guy calmed down and agreed with him. If this guy is completely useless, then a girl will do his work. He laughs and runs his hand down Morano's back. She gets really mad about this, and the bald guy says that if she doesn't want them to cut his partner's bounty, then she should be obedient and do what they say. Hiroto is about to do something, but she grabs his arm and says that he shouldn't get into an argument with them. The bald guy says with a smile that she's smart enough. Morano says that she didn't say that she agreed to this. She turns around and says with a stern look that if they don't calm down, then she'll file a complaint against them to the association. The bald guy says that she should relax since they're just joking. Although he wasn't joking when he said that they were useless insects. They should remember that if he gets bored with them, then there might be a few more missing people in the dungeon. They're new, so they probably don't know about the lawlessness inside the dungeons, right? Another guy says that the crime rate has been increasing lately, so they better not anger them. The guy passes by him and says that he should finish this already. He walks towards the portal and says that it's time for them to earn money. After some time, they enter the dungeon and began to fight against the monster that attacked them. Hiroto looks at this and thinks that these hunters are C rank and they are quite experienced, so they will have no problems in battle. However, because of their habits, he cannot even be polite about them. They all heard loud cracking sounds and this immediately caught their attention. Suddenly, the ceiling of the cave began to collapse and this made everyone inside tense up. They begin to scream loudly in surprise and say that the ceiling is collapsing. What is even going on here? They should run after him. Hiroto survived the incident, holds Morano's hand and asks if she is okay. She agrees and thanks him for his help. The hunters hear loud noises from the monster, and it attracts their attention. They see a huge S-rank Hell Guardian Cerberus. The surprised hunters loudly ask what is this monster doing here? Isn't this dungeon difficulty B? One of them thinks that this is very bad. He needs to use these guys as bait, maybe then at least he will be able to survive. Hiroto calmly raises his hand and takes out his new sword from his inventory. He thinks this sword is called Genocide. The description said that it feeds on human blood and becomes stronger because of it. But how much power does this sword have now? He is going to find out in practice. After thinking some more, he changed his mind and lowered the sword. He seriously says that he will be bait, and they should take Morano and run from here. She is very surprised by his decision and looks at him with a puzzled look. The guy standing next to him says that he understands everything. This means that he decided to sacrifice himself to protect her. The bald guy takes her away by grabbing her hand, but she tries to resist to stay and fight with him. They all leave and say that they don't like this. They need to get out of here quickly. Hiroto looks at them, mentally apologizes to Morano and thinks that even though they came here to raise her level, she is no match for this monster now. He puts his backpack on the ground and thinks that there are no witnesses. Now he can give it his all. He turns around and notices that Cerberus ran very fast and appeared behind him. He opens one of his mouths, from which a strong flame is visible, and quickly runs towards him. Hiroto jumps and dodges the bite of this monster. He lands and slides on the ground for several meters. He looks at Cerberus and thinks that this monster is huge and its speed is incredible. Hiroto jumps very high again, and the monster just watches from the ground. He calls the system window and takes out another sword from there. He threw this sword sharply and hit one of the 3 heads of Cerberus. He landed on the ground, and the monster immediately turned to him with a very angry look. Hiroto thinks that this gives the monster simply terrifying strength, and he did not leave even a scratch on this monster. Cerberus is definitely stronger than the undead he fought before. He holds his new sword in his hands with a serious face and thinks that, however, that is why he cannot help but try it. He jumps up and activates the special weapon skill, God Slayer of the 1st level. He deals a very strong blow with his sword and cuts this monster into 2 parts. Hiroto stands next to the dead Cerberus, sees the split left by his strike and wonders, I wonder how many weapons exist inside the system? He would never have thought that this sword was so strong. The system notifies that the skill of the Lord of Gluttony, he gets 5 points to the strength indicator. Hiroto looks at the sword in his hand with a smile and thinks that with this he will not lose to anyone. Because of this application, he constantly walks like on a knife edge. If you think about it, the sword was given to him just recently. Do they really think that without a sword he is no match for this Deathstalker? In other words, until he starts absorbing human blood, he has no chance of survival? He heard the sound of footsteps and suddenly turns around with a worried look. He sees a man who just came to him and is standing in place. This man asks, is this devastation his doing? Hiroto wonders what he should do if he saw everything. Maybe he should try to talk to him? He tells him his name and asks what his name is. The man says that he apologizes for that, because it is rude to ask questions without even introducing yourself. His name is Murakami Shingo. He is an S-rank hunter, and he is currently ranked 4th in the hunter rankings. Hiroto is very surprised by this and asks loudly, is he an S-rank hunter? He thinks that a Deathstalker should be an S-rank holder. He got the worst possible option. Shingo starts looking for something in his jacket, and this really tensed Hiroto, who was standing in front of him. He took out a piece of paper and handed it to him, surprising him. Shingo was embarrassed by his reaction and asks, so he is one of the novice hunters. Usually, when he meets an unfamiliar face in the dungeon, as a sign of greeting, they must show each other their hunter IDs. Hiroto took his business card with a surprised face and reads what is written on it. On his ID is written the name he gave and that he is 48 years old, a hunter rank of S, and a power level of A. He thinks that according to Yuzuki, that screen is only visible to those whose power level reaches rank S. This means that he has nothing to do with the Deathstalker. Hiroto starts searching for his ID in his pocket and says that it is his turn now. Shingo looks at his ID and asks, is his hunter power level F? He himself is not particularly welcome among S-rank hunters, but his situation seems even worse. By the way, who is the culprit of this destruction? Hiroto says that there was another person here who saved him from Cerberus and escaped. He thinks that it is good that he did not say anything unnecessary, although his cover story seems crude. Shingo looks at him and asks, so this is another job of X, right? Hiroto looks at him with a confused look and asks what he means. Shingo leaves and says that he can forget about it, because it is a long story. Hiroto asks what an S-rank hunter is doing in such a simple dungeon. Shingo asks, he knows about the Artemis Hunter Training Academy, right? To tell the truth, there have been quite a few monster incidents ever since almost all of them were killed. Everything hinted that the same thing would happen in this dungeon soon. So he decided to do his own investigation. Hiroto asks what that means with a slightly worried look. Shingo says with a small smile that he can forget about it since it's also a long story. It's better for him not to know the details. Hiroto looks at him with a calm face in silence, turns around and says that in that case he needs to go. He called him by his last name, which is why he turned around and politely asks if he needs something. Shingo stands still and says that fate itself brought them together here. This dungeon was part of a chain of incidents and monsters that shouldn't be here in principle appeared here. He shouldn't misunderstand him, but it's better to refrain from conquering dungeons for now. It seems like this is a very serious matter. Hiroto says with a calm face that he is grateful to him for the advice. After that, he leaves and looks at the system window that appeared in front of his face. He thinks that he doesn't even need to look at the warning from the system. So this is what S-rank hunters are like, right? He is a real monster. He looks down with a very scared look and thinks that he is still too weak after all. After that, he leaves, and Shingo sits down on the ground and thinks that everything is as usual. There are traces of an unknown A or S-rank hunter here. In other words, X exists, and he suddenly turned out to be an ordinary guy. This can't be. To destroy the landscape like that you need to be at least an A rank. For an F rank, this is impossible under any circumstances. Sometime later, at the Hunter Association, in one of the offices, the chairman of the Hunter Association, Damada Gosetsu, who has the third place in the S ranking, the strength of an A rank hunter, the old generation, has gathered here. The second oldest, the leader of the Death Scythe Guild, Murakami Shingo, the old generation. The third oldest, the leader of the Black Dragon's Fangs Guild, Tsuyoshi Omichi, fifth place in the S rank, Hunter Power Level A, the old generation. Gosetsu says with a serious look that he can come in. A guest of the guild, a representative of the largest company in the entertainment industry, Takato, second place in the S rank, young generation, enters the office. He greets everyone and says that he was busy filming a drama, which is why he was late. Gosetsu asks if the title of hunter means anything to him at all. Takato sits down in his seat and says with a smile that with his finances, he can speak frankly. This title is a good way to always stay on the wave of popularity, doesn't he think so? Gosetsu gets very angry because of what he said. Shingo notices this and tells the chairman that he should calm down. He doesn't listen to him, and says loudly that the first in the hunter rankings never shows up to their meetings. The new generation is no good at all. The Hunter Association, or rather, who do they think he is? Takato asks with a smile, isn't he just a grumpy old man? What he said made Gosetsu even more angry, and he opened his mouth in surprise. Shingo calls the chairman and says that he should lecture him later since they all have other things to do. Gosetsu calmed down and says that they should start the S-rank hunter conference. And the agenda includes the Demon Lord. Takato became more serious and asks what he means. Gosetsu says that to be more precise, the conversation will be about the Lord Hunters. Takato understood him and says that it turns out that they gathered because of their S-rank company. He already thought that they would talk about the Demon Lord app. Gosetsu's attention was caught by the fact that he mentioned the app and he asks what he means. Takato says that it is a long story that he does not need to listen to. Gosetsu looks at him and asks if he means that they created a special app for themselves and distributed it to hunters. Takato says with a smile that it is something like that. Is there something wrong with this? The chairman says that they should talk about the old diet building. Takato asks if he is talking about where Nagato's dungeon opened. Gosetsu agrees and says that as they all know, it is one of the 7 great dungeons. Countries from all over the world have sent hunters there, but no one has ever managed to conquer it. The first of the 7 great dungeons opened in America. The tragedy it caused swallowed up an entire city. In Japan, the great dungeon swallowed up the diet building. The honor of their country is at stake. This expedition must not fail. He has heard rumors that they, the younger generation, have begun to act behind their backs. They shouldn't forget that the expedition is being led by the Hunters Association Board. Takato says with a smile that he will tell the others about it, but he has a question. He is just wondering if he is jealous and picky. 10 years ago, a talented S-rank hunter appeared out of nowhere, and he was ranked 2nd. And at the very top is Sayako Kuju. Shingo looks at him and says that she, the head hunter, has never shown up at the meetings. He is starting to get a headache from this young generation of hunters who live in their own minds. Gosetsu says that no matter what, they should all moderate their selfishness. They shouldn't underestimate the Hunters Association. Takato agrees with him indifferently and falls silent. Omichi calls the chairman and asks, by the way, what is going on with the Artemis Hunter School? Gosetsu says that he regrets his son's death, but the investigation into his death was closed. They already discussed it. Omichi asks with a displeased look, does he mean that all those uncontrollable monsters just disappeared from the face of the earth? He taught him to run in unexpected situations. As an S-rank hunter, he raised him since he was a child. Does he even understand what this means? He slams the table, raises his voice and says that he even gave him a special artifact that signals about dangerous monsters. He had every chance to escape. He couldn't die so easily. He was killed by people, not monsters. That's why he couldn't escape. Takato asks, is he talking about that incident where only 2 survived? Let's say he was right, but then his son's killers have long been in the grave, haven't they? Omichi asks with an angry look, is this a reason for the association not to continue the investigation? If so, then he will do it himself. Still, the Hunter Association is of no use, no wonder the young ones wipe their feet on them. First, he will find out more about those two survivors. He thinks that the artifact he gave him was worth hundreds of millions of yen. His son was killed before he even met a slightly dangerous monster, he is sure of it, and their goal was his expensive equipment. If the culprits are still alive, he will definitely find out about it and personally kill them. Sometime later, in the dungeon that formed on the site of the former Artemis Academy for Hunters, the 4th investigation building, Morano says that he should not abandon her like last time. Hiroto apologizes to her and says that it is his fault. The system window says that there are 6 days and 12 hours left until the Death Stalker appears. After that, they entered the dungeon with a group of hunters and Morano says that she would never have thought that she would return to this dungeon again. Hiroto says that he himself did not want to return here, but this is the best option if they want to level up faster. He thinks that one of the reasons for their return is that after that incident, a wide variety of monsters were noticed here. And the other reason is the Black Knight living in the depths of the dungeon. He will kill more new monsters and improve his skills. Morano will be leveling up at this time, and then they will start hunting the Black Knight together. Hiroto says that for now they will act like ordinary porters, and then they will wait for the right moment and separate from the group. Morano asks, are they planning to spend 5 days in the dungeon? Will they have enough provisions? He says that she does not have to worry, because he has a storage room. He thinks that he has conducted various experiments with it, and found out that about 2 tons can fit in there. Also, time practically does not pass in the storage room, so there is no need to worry about the safety of the provisions. Hiroto says that he bought about 500,000 yen worth of goods. That will definitely be enough for them. Morano is very surprised by this and asks, did he spend so much time? He says with shining eyes that they practically threw away half of their compensation, so let them at least fill their stomachs with the other half. Morano thinks that if you think about it, then he really likes to eat, although it is not noticeable from him. Hiroto seriously thinks that as long as they remain in someone's sights, there is a high probability that they will have to hide in the forests, or even flee the country. A guy comes up to them and says that he would like to apologize for that story with Cerberus. Hiroto remembered him and says that they went to that dungeon together. The guy says that everyone, including him, survived, so he is glad that everything ended well. After that, the 3 of them went further through the cave and came to hunters who had gathered in several groups and were resting. The 3 of them sat in a crowd of these hunters, eating their food and talking to each other. A bald guy looks at them from behind a rock and tells the leader that the preparations are going well. But is he sure about this? The guy smiles and says that he met a couple of S-rank hunters and learned that they used the same skill as him. He remembers the past and says that at first there was emptiness, but then a strange sword appeared in his hands. It looks like he got help from that old man who's an S-rank. He only pulled out that weapon when his life and the life of his companion were on the line. No matter how you look at it, that sword is clearly unusual. The bald guy asks, even if he says that, isn't it just his instincts? The leader says that judging by the shape and how he pulled out the sword, he can guarantee that it's something powerful. That's a great excuse to kill and rob him. It'll be considered another accident anyway. Either way, there are hundreds if not thousands of stolen swords in the world already, and that guy is only an F rank. A porter is nothing more than a small fry. What happens to people like him? They get killed, and that's natural. At the same time, Hiroto says that it's still such an amazing coincidence that they went into the dungeon as a group again. The guy says that this time the job should be safe but well paid. Hiroto says that their task now is to eliminate the camp on the intermediate levels. The guy says that it seems that someone is determined to study this place up and down. Although it has already been confirmed from the outside that the dungeon is completely safe, so it is unlikely that they will die. Hiroto looks at him suspiciously and asks if he thinks that this is all a bit too easy. The guy says that the most dangerous thing in this place is a group of A-rank hunters who are currently exploring the lower floors. In the last incident, many B-rank hunters died here, so the prices have risen. Also, the target of their mission is in the safest area. Since their task is to protect the porters, they will be paid a lot of money for killing a couple of weak monsters. They need to reach the middle levels, set up a camp for explorers of the depths, and they will be able to leave. Hiroto thinks that if the rumors are to be believed, then the most interesting things are happening in the depths of this dungeon. In the last incident with the dungeon, Cerberus appeared out of nowhere. And the incident before this touched upon this place, the tragedy of the hunters of the Artemis Academy. And his very first incident the day he received the application. All these incidents happened in the dungeons. Is it a simple coincidence? Or was it all set up? Whatever the case, now the main task for him and Morano is to survive. And for this they need to become stronger, and the dungeon is perfect for this. But what if even their appearance was planned by someone? The guy calls him by name and asks what's wrong with him. Hiroto looks at him with a small smile and says that he is fine. They notice that the hunters are starting to get up and say that it looks like the rest stop is over, so it's time for them to move out. After some time, the hunters move deeper into the dungeon and met a monster on their way. In the system window it is written that it is an underground worm with a difficulty level of C. Underground worms, colony difficulty level B+. One of the hunters notices these monsters and they all start falling from the ceiling. The guy says loudly that they are approaching. Several hunters with shields stand in front next to each other and hold back this army of monsters. The mages standing behind them are about to use their magic and their staffs begin to glow. At the moment of the combined attack of several mages, the shield bearers step aside and a stream of flame hits the monsters. The guy raises his hand and says loudly that the swordsmen should attack now. Hiroto watches the battle from afar and thinks that these people are experienced C-rank hunters. He takes out a dagger from his inventory, which attracts Morano's attention, and she calls his name in confusion. One of the hunters, who lost his vigilance, was very surprised when he noticed a monster quickly approaching him. Hiroto threw his dagger and stopped the monster that was about to attack this guy. The hunter looks at the killed monster and wonders where this throwing knife came from. Hiroto turns around and says that if he meets the Black Knight with his current strength, he probably won't be able to handle him. Morano says that people are saying that the Black Knight has only been spotted on the lower floors, so there's nothing to worry about yet. He says that no matter what, they're already on the middle floors. They'll reach the right place and leave their share of the materials for the camp. After that, they can separate from the group. Morano starts laughing, which gets Hiroto's attention, and he asks what's wrong with her. She looks at him with a smile and says that he's taking this job so seriously. He says that he was paid in advance, so he should do something. A guy they know runs up to them, calling his name and saying that they've run into a little trouble. In that battle, one of the party members fell into a crevice and is most likely injured. There should be healing potions in his luggage, right? Will he go with him? Hiroto agrees to this and says that they should go. The bald guy and his leader look at them and start smiling because of this. At the same time, in the Hunter Association building, Tamawa is sitting at the computer next to other people. He takes out a card and thinks that it is an A-rank hunter ID. The good thing is that he has one trick that will allow him to find out who his target is before the system tells him about it. The sooner he kills them, the better. And as long as he knows where this guy is, he has an advantage. Those who have reached rank A have the right to create their own hunter guild. In other words, if he is interested in any hunter of the association and he wants to invite him to his guild, then through the database he can get any information about him. So now he is in the dungeon where the hunters of the Artemis Academy died, and he is acting as a porter there. He gets up from the table and says that here he found him. At the same time, the bald guy says that they should wait. They did a roll call after the battle with the monsters and were missing one more hunter. The guy says that now he understands why he has not seen Yamaguchi anywhere. Hiroto asks, is he one of their group? The bald guy says that he had a stab wound. If they don't find him quickly, he might die. The guy thinks about it and asks if they should split up to find them faster. Hiroto will go with him to look for the one who fell into the crevice, and Morano will go to look for the missing Yamaguchi. Does everyone agree to this? She agrees to this, and Hiroto says nothing. The guy says that as soon as they save the fallen one, they will join the search for Yamaguchi. Morano nods with a smile to Hiroto, who stands next to her, and says nothing. After some time, he follows the guy, who leads him to a place where there were many other hunters and asks how he should understand this. The leader of this group goes to him and says that last time he noticed an interesting sword on him. He thinks that now the first place in the ranking of S-rank hunters is occupied by Tsuyako Kujo. When she was still a B-rank hunter she had exactly the same sword. And then there's that spatial storage skill. Hiroto looks at him with a calm face and wonders if he's really seen everything. The leader says with a smile that she could destroy an entire building with one blow. When he first saw it, he couldn't come to his senses for a long time. Hiroto asks if this isn't natural for S-rank talents. What's wrong with that? The leader asks if he didn't know. She rose to the top of the world when she was no more than 20. She appeared out of nowhere about 10 years ago, and back then, her talents were rated S-rank. Until now, only a few A-rank talents in the association had achieved that rank. But aren't they just a bunch of pathetic old people? Hiroto thinks that if his sword and that S-rank hunter's weapon are identical, then he can now say with certainty that the app system is only visible to S-rank talents. He said that an entire building was destroyed with one blow. Her sword must have been strengthened with human blood. He throws his backpack on the ground and asks, "So what does his story have to do with this situation?" The leader says with a big smile that they will kill him and take the sword. In the old games, this happened to players all the time. That's what it all means. Hiroto looks up and asks, "Are they going to kill and rob him, right?" He looks at them with a scary look and asks how many people have they killed so far because of their greed? They all start smiling and their leader says that after 20, they stopped counting. Hiroto asks what are they going to do with Morano. The bald guy says with a smile that he still can't calm down. First, they will grab her. He is afraid that if someone tries her before him, the taste will not be the same. Hiroto turns to him sharply with an angry expression. He thinks that Morano is a martial artist. Even if she has skills that can kill instantly, her level and status are still low. He needs to hurry. Hiroto takes out his sword from his inventory and says that it looks like the app developers are doing everything they can to make him start killing. The leader looks at him with a tense expression and asks, "Did he just mention the app?" The hunters say that they should look at it. The sword really did appear out of nowhere. Hiroto starts releasing bright energy and says that in order to survive, he will kill, and if he has to kill them to strengthen his weapon, then he will do it. He opens his eyes with the sword in his hands and says that he is not a god or a merciful Buddha. People like them are more useful dead, so he is not going to hold back. The hunters ask loudly with surprised faces, "Is he not going to hold back? This funny low-class porter is just asking to be killed." In that case, they will not hold back either. Hiroto moves at such a high speed that he simply disappears from their sight. The hunters, surprised and worried by this, start looking around and trying to find him. One of them was very surprised when he saw Hiroto running towards him with a sword in his hands. He struck the guy in the head with the hilt of his sword and seriously injured him. He fell to the ground and started screaming loudly in pain while the surprised hunter said that this can't be. Doesn't he have an F-rank talent? His maximum level should be very low. Hiroto calmly stands still and says that they thought he was asking for death, but he has an excellent sword. He stands in a fighting stance and asks if they have any more questions. The worried hunter stands still and silently look at him. Hiroto strikes very hard and fast with his sword and breaks the other guy's sword, which surprised him very much. He takes advantage of the fact that the guy was distracted by this, runs up to him very quickly and delivers a strong knee to his face. He throws the guy to the ground and emits a frighteningly dark aura. Hiroto, with a blood-stained hand, asks if they still think he is not a danger to them. He delivers another strong blow with his sword, but his opponent manages to jump back. He says with a wide smile that even if he had a good sword 10 times over, he is still an F rank. They just need to hit him, and he will die. Hiroto immediately delivers another blow with his sword and cuts off his hand. He says that he is good at dodging, but what a pity. It is still within his reach. He really scares the two hunters standing nearby by saying that they are the only ones left. The leader of the group is very afraid and his body starts to tremble and sweat runs down his face. Hiroto says that he did not take him seriously just because he is in F rank. It was a fatal mistake. He goes to the scared leader of the hunter group and thinks that they are using senseless violence. They took the equipment of the weak and lured the strong into a trap. That's what they always do, that's their way of life. And now they're going to feel all the pain that the people they killed felt, the all-consuming fear. He jumps up and swings his sword, which the frightened leader notices and calls for help. Hiroto attacks him mercilessly and thinks that what he said at that moment exactly matched the words of the people who became his victims. He turns to the guy who brought him here and asks with a calm face what he will do. The guy is very worried about what happened and says that they made him do it. Hiroto stands still and silently looked at him for a few seconds. He turns around and says that he understands him. He leaves and thinks that he needs to quickly find Morano. The guy takes advantage of the fact that he turned away, takes out a small bottle and immediately opens it. He swings and thinks that this mixture of poisons from various dungeon monsters is his special invention. He throws the contents at him with a sharp movement of his hand, but Hiroto notices it and immediately dodges. The guy is very scared because of this and asks, "Did he dodge without even turning around?" Hiroto turns to him with a disappointed look and says that he hoped that at least he was normal here. He even feels a little sorry. He immediately strikes with his sword and cuts off the guy's hand. At the same moment, several hunters whom he injured get up and start running after their leader. They all stop because they notice a huge snake that got in their way. The huge monster moves very quickly and eats their leader. The hunters look at what is happening with a shocked look and ask, "Where did the cave snake come from?" The frightened guy is sitting on the ground, holding his wound from which blood is flowing, and thinks that Cerberus was also abnormal. Why are anomalies in the dungeons happening more and more often? For starters, there has already been one incident in this dungeon. And also, what's wrong with this guy? A huge snake swings its tail and defeats two hunters who were nearby with one blow. Several system windows appear in front of Hiroto's face, which say that a murder of people has been recorded and the sword has evolved. The special sword skill God Slayer has reached level 2 and a special sword skill, Murder Alley, has been obtained. He wonders, does that mean the system has counted these murders for him? Anyway, he needs to hurry. Right after that, he defeated that huge monster very quickly. Hiroto climbs up the ledge, starts running, and thinks that Morano should wait for him. After some time, she notices him and calls his name with a happy look. She proudly stands next to the guy she beat up and tied up. Hiroto was happy about this and thinks that it looks like she is completely okay. He goes to her and asks what happened here. Morano with a displeased look says that that guy suddenly attacked her. Hiroto says that he is glad that she was not hurt either. She was surprised when she heard this and asks, "So he was attacked too?" He says that he fought them off, but some of them managed to run away. The escaped hunters were attacked by a cave snake. Morano was very surprised because of this and asks what he just said. First there was Cerberus, and now this. No matter how you look at it, haven't there been too many incidents in the dungeons lately? Hiroto seriously recalls how Shingo told him to stop going into the dungeons earlier. He says that it's because of them. Although it would be more accurate to say that it's all related to the Demon Lord's app. Morano looks around and asks, then how should they tell them about what happened? Should they just say that he defeated the cave snake? If they find out, won't it cause a stir? Hiroto says that it's very simple. He was planning on leaving the group a little later, come what may. Morano is surprised by this and asks with a confused look what he means. Hiroto says that those hunters are close combat fighters. Which of them would find it strange if one or two porters went missing? He extends his hand to her and says that it's time for them to go. Together, they will pave their way to life. Morano looks at him with a happy smile and a flushed face, extends his hand and agrees. At the same time, at the entrance to the dungeon that was formed in the building of the now-defunct Artemis Hunter Academy, Tomoe goes to the portal and tells the inspectors of the Hunter Association that, as he sees, they are still serving bravely today. One of them turns around and calls him sir with a small smile. Tomoe walks towards them with a sly smile and kicks down a small pillar. Several people point their guns at him and say that entering the dungeon without permission is strictly prohibited. Tomoe smugly shows his card and asks, even for an A-rank hunter? The soldiers continue to aim at him and say that the rule applies even to A-rank hunters. Tomoe scratches his head with a displeased look and says that he hates this bureaucracy. It is impossible to conquer the dungeon with surveillance alone. One of the soldiers says that they can't do anything, rules are rules. They're going to get in trouble if they don't follow the instructions. Tomoe swings his hand very quickly, creating a very fast wind wave. The soldiers stand still and close their eyes because of what he did. One of the soldiers watches with a horrified look as one of his comrades falls to the ground with his head cut off. Tomoe smiles and says that he understands them. No one wants to get in trouble for breaking the rules, but they need to understand him too. If he doesn't get inside and kill a few freaks, then he's the one in trouble. But first, he needs to come up with an excuse for all this mess. He has a great idea of what they should all do. An unusual monster was spotted in the dungeon and was able to get outside. As a result, everyone outside and inside the dungeon died tragically, and there were no witnesses left. It will be problematic if they start an investigation, so he'll need to deal with the dungeon as well. One of the shocked soldiers looks at him in horror and asks, is he completely crazy? Is he really going to kill every single one of them? Tomoe says that he is here on business, and that they were unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, they should just accept it. The shocked soldier says that this is pure madness. Tomoe says with a big smile that he will take that as a compliment. The soldier aims his gun at him and says that there are rank hunters inside, so he won't be able to deal with them that easily. Tomoe continues to smile and asks if there is only one A-rank person in there. He starts laughing loudly and says that he has been equal to an S rank for a long time now. He points to his necklace and says that it is all due to the power of his artifact. He grabs one of the soldiers by the head and loudly asks if a measly A rank can do anything against him. He kills the man and loudly says that it is time to start the party. Tamawa enters the dungeon and asks where his dear targets are. He is surprised that someone called his phone, and this gets his attention. He turns around and thinks, is there communication even in the dungeon? Although he is not that far from the entrance. Takato, it is one of the leaders of the ranking. What does he want from an A rank like him? He answers the phone and he asks, his name is Tamawa, right? He agrees and says that they met at the Demon Lord Hunter's meeting. Takato says with a smile that he wants to talk about the two he hunted. Tamawa gets tense because of this and thinks that, as always, he is well aware of everything that happens inside the system. Just how big is his information network? He asks, is there something wrong with this? Takato says that in general terms, he is a member of the Lord Hunters, which means his affairs concern them too. Tamawa asks what he means. He gets very angry, grits his teeth and asks, does he really want to steal his prey? At the same time, Hiroto stops and says that all this definitely smells bad. Morano stands behind him and asks what he is talking about. He says he is talking about the S-rank hunter. She asks if this is the one they told him about at the bottom of the cliff. Hiroto says there is a person with a sword that absorbs human blood. It is the same sword as his. And according to them, she is incredibly strong. He thinks that means that in the dungeons she has repeatedly killed people and absorbed their blood. He says her name is Tsuyako Kuju, the number 1 ranked hunter. This woman is dangerous. Sometime later at the research team's camp, Hiroto peeks out from behind a rock, looked at the hunters standing there and hid back. He says that work is work, he needs to do this. Morano says that it seems like he was not joking when he said that. Hiroto says that he gave them an advance after all. What about her? What is that potion in her hand? She says with a smile that she took it from that guy as payment for trying to attack her. She deserves compensation, right? Hiroto says that now it's time for them to go down to the lower levels, hunt monsters and level up their skills. They went on together, but he suddenly stopped and remembered the past. He calls Morano and says that he would like to talk about this potion. It instantly heals minor wounds, right? But there are more effective types that are said to have an effect even on internal diseases. Doesn't she find this strange? Morano looks at the potion in her hand and says that in theory, the potion should activate internal chakras, thereby starting the healing process of internal organs. He thinks that's not true. Hiroto says that potions are obtained from chests in dungeons or from the bodies of monsters. For everyone, this has become something natural. But first of all, who creates these potions?